Tales of the Little People with Drew. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. And those bones have been very dusty until very recently. We've started to get some afternoon showers, which has been nice. But yeah, what was it, the past 2 months? It was nothing.
Nothing but dust.
Nothing but dust. And it was getting real dusty. So hopefully those bones are getting washed off a little bit. It's easier to find old bones and arrowheads. And we are not joined by the Watcher, unfortunately, this week. He said, what is he doing? He said he's got some job. He got shipped out somewhere. So we wish the best for you wherever you are, buddy. Maybe you'll be with us next week. But we do have our good buddy LP with us. LP, is that the name we're going to use for this, buddy?
I mean, you can call me Drew. It's fine, but yeah, LP McQuack.
LP McQuack in the Discord.
Snake Force in the house. How was everybody?
Yeah, man. So let's see. You sent me this document. What was it, like 4 months ago? How long ago did you send me this?
It would have been the fall of last year.
Oh, wow.
So more than that. Jesus,
yeah.
More than that, yeah.
Wow,
yeah,
long
it's probably
time.
the fall of last year.
Yeah. So he did a bunch of work on this, and I've had it in the back of my mind for a long time. Like, we need to get him on the show to talk about this, and here we are. So thank you for coming on.
Absolutely, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
it's a really cool mask you have too. Like his whole face is just like a cool mask. We don't actually know what he looks like, folks.
That's right. It's totally anonymous.
That beard looks so real.
I'm much smaller than I appear.
Nice record collection back there. Yeah, I have to say.
Oh yeah,
that is an epic vinyl collection. Yeah.
Yes, the old wall of vinyl.
Yeah.
You got a procession vinyl in that wall?
I do not.
Oh.
I do not. I'm
unacceptable.
I know. I waited up. I just haven't done it yet. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good.
It's all right. Yeah.
We'll have to give you a special discount code.
Oh
yeah. I'll see what I can do then. It will certainly get played. That's for sure. We've listened to it. Like, I've played it through the same system anyway.
All right.
All right, on. Well, why don't you give us a little bit of what we're going to be talking about? Like, kind of explain what your thought process was on going through all this research, and like, where are we going with this?
Sure. Yeah. This isn't. I can imagine from your point of view, it must appear as if I did a bunch of research with some sort of a purpose in mind, but that's actually not at all what happened.
Okay.
So I take a trip every year or two with some of my buddies from back home, and we normally go somewhere out in the woods, hiking, going down a river, that kind of thing. And I pulled a big trip in 2020 to go down the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho. It's one of those once-in-a-lifetime pulls. You do 8 days on the water. It's really, really great.
Man,
and so normally when we do these, I try to kind of pull some local stories from wherever we're going. We've kind of gone over the country doing it. And I wound up pulling some Native American stories. And one of the Shoshone stories, which is in the Native American section of this document, just stuck with me, and for obvious reasons, because it's absolutely, it's ridiculous. Like, I'm in the Snake Force, obviously. I'm listened to all your show. I'm into all this weird stuff. And it's a story that stuck with me because of it being unlike any other story I'd heard. Anyway, fast forward a year or two, and it just had stuck with me for a bit. And I started thinking, man, I bet there's other stories like that. So I just went through sacredtext.com initially, and then through Wikipedia and back through archive.org. And I swear to God, this is the product of a lot of Google searching and Control F function in documents. That's really all I was doing.
Okay.
And I was just looking for stories about little people that were like this one story. And it turns out there are none. There are zero. But by the time I knew that, I'd collected and had a 75-page document. And I was like, because what I would do is, so I'd look up at night links to stories, and I'd put them in a Word doc, and then I'd go, and at the end of my work day, I'd go through and just kind of go to sacred text and highlight whole pages. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then like print 4 to a page. So I was only printing out 15, 20 physical sheets at a time. And I'd read them at night looking for these sorts of stories. Anyway, it turned into this massive document. And I had all these stories from all over the world and all this weird stuff. And I was like, well, what do I do with it now that I didn't find any of what I was looking for? And then I thought, I'll send it to Russ. He'll read it first thing in the morning and be real happy about it. So that's how it wound up in your lap. Because it was genuinely, I mean, I haven't added to this since I sent it to you. I haven't even really thought about it that much. I go back and reread it because there's so many weird stories in here.
Yeah.
But like, I don't, this isn't, so I'm, just in case anybody is walking into this thinking, oh, like, this is going to be in any way similar to other guests you've had who have a real like mastery of the topic or devoted a lot of time to it. Like, this is just something I came across. And now I have all these stories. I don't know what in the hell's going on, fellas.
Okay.
It's weird as could be.
That just sounds like us. Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
No mastery of the topic. We're just like, what the hell's going on? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You fit right in.
Yeah. But so I've got a big document here, like we talked about. And so I'll just read the subject headings here. So we've got little people kind of throughout the Western world. So that's just a brief overview that we'll definitely get through today in this show. And then after that, the whole little people in the British Isles. So that's this whole thing, we talked about it, or you talked about it at great length with, what was it, Fairy Faith in Celtic Country? Is that the one?
That's right.
That we did? Yeah, y'all did? So it's from that era, which is kind of 1890s to the 1920s. There was a lot of debate going on in the UK because they were both documenting these stories, but also saying, same thing as we're saying, what in the hell do we do with all these stories? Anyway, after that, there's a whole move after the 19th century of like science is going to explain little people. You know what I mean? It'll explain these stories. And then I don't think it did, obviously, but the stories involved in that, the way that comes back around to stuff that's brought up in ancient Greece it's unreal. But anyway, then there's a whole section of stories, just people from around the globe, and then a whole section of Native Americans and their stories of little people. The Native American section is definitely the coolest.
Okay.
Like, those stories coming out of those traditions are unreal. So anyway, well, that's where it is.
Okay, so before you start in on some of them, tell us the story that you were talking about that got you looking for. What is that story? What is the one that you said that you couldn't find?
Do you want me to actually read it? I mean, do you want me to read it straight through?
Yeah, I mean, you can read it or just give us a synopsis. What was the story that you learned about that you were looking for?
Okay, so in that story, it involves the Shoshone people living with these little people, was a tribe of little people nearby. They were just regular people, right? So that's something we'll talk about in just a second. We talk about my overarching views on this. Is sometimes little people stories, they really are just little people who live nearby and do stuff, right? But sometimes it's more supernatural or ethereal, right? But in this story, the Shoshones just didn't like these people, and there was an issue with them, and they round them up and set them all on fire.
Oh.
And the details of the conversation, no, sorry, they didn't maybe set them on fire so much as I think they set a fire and trapped them in a valley. But then there's all these details of what the little people said among the tribe as they were hatching plans. It's very weird. It's very weird. And it's like, it's horrible.
That's similar to
horrible. That's why it stuck with me.
Okay, and that's similar to the Lovelock Cave story, right? Except it was giants. They trapped them in the cave, and then they set a fire, and it kills them all. Yeah. Right.
So that I was aware of, but I thought there would be other stories of native peoples talking about little people being either destroyed by fire one way or another, or intentionally, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But no, I didn't actually find much of that at all. But along the way, I found a bunch of other stories about things that are very weird. It's not dissimilar to the UFO stories in that, of course, it does dovetail against it in a couple ways, and some of the details I'll definitely point out. But it's also just that, like, if you look at a bunch of the stories, some of the patterns are unmistakable, and I have no idea what they mean.
Right. Yeah.
Why is that a pattern? What is that? What is that? I don't know, man.
All right. Well, let's do it. Let's see what you got.
All right, let's do this. Did you flip over the Sands of Time? Is somebody watching that? Because I don't have any clock on when we started.
Yeah,
this.
we got a clock here in front of us.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you want me to actually just read through this page of thoughts I put on at the start?
Yeah, let's hear it. Yeah.
All right. So this is my thoughts after like reading all this stuff. I threw together a one-page synopsis thinking, Morning Russ is going to want a one-page synopsis. So.
Yeah. But Morning Russ opens it up and sees 137 pages and goes, "What?"
Well, I honestly considered sending a one-page synopsis first and then saying, if this interests you, anyway, it doesn't matter. So, all right, here are my thoughts here. The stories collected here run the gamut from explainable to fantasy and from credible to urban legend. I've tried to include stories that describe the person or fae or hobgoblin, including their appearance, dress, and where they live. I've tried to include descriptions of their character and, where possible, first-hand accounts of interactions with these people or creatures or pygmies. Sometimes the little people are small hominids. Sometimes they are supernatural tricksters living in the rocks, caves, or riverbanks nearby. And sometimes they inhabit homes or interact with people in their homes. I tried to capture excerpts that show the breadth of experience tied to these little people. So I ultimately arrived at four thoughts that need to be reckoned with throughout this whole thing. So if we go through this, and especially if it takes a while and we really dig in, 4 thoughts that are consistent throughout. 1, the general use of some small supernatural trickster to explain some simple occurrences around the house, like misplaced clothing, a stumbling block, broken items, a kitchen fire, those sorts of things. Those seem a logical thing that one could create. I've lost my keys so many times, it's like there's a little fairy sneaking in at night and hiding. Perfectly reasonable thing, I could imagine that being created. It even seems logical that some sorts of superstitious behavior, leaving food out to appease the fae, for example, could take hold based on nothing more than the fact that serious accidents happen and people will do curious things to try to prevent them from happening. In particular, there's a story coming up in Russia of the house little person that lives in your stove, and if you make them unhappy, they'll burn the house down, these sorts of things. Okay. So I could imagine how people just have bad things happen, let's create a tradition to stave them off, right? That makes sense. Okay. The popularity of the stories helps spread them. That's undeniable and evidenced all throughout Europe. They're popular stories and people like hearing. They're easy to use as a story with a warning for moral purposes, to make some cultural point, etc., right? Something more akin to apocrypha or urban legends rather than a journalistic description of some events, right? The telephone game would be applicable here. I could see how these stories change a bit as they get handed around. That's undeniable. That is absolutely something on the table. Okay. Now's the fun part. From ancient Greece through to the UK in the 19th century, there's a consistent cultural thread. What about Native Americans? What about Pacific Islanders? What about these others around the world? Why are their stories so pervasive and so similar? No amount of telephone game explains that, I don't believe. Not really. And then lastly, people today still see little people. They have these experiences. The culture of fairy storytelling may not be as strong as it was in prior centuries, but people sometimes have experiences that sound very much like these sorts of creatures. So what do we do with that? Ultimately, I don't know what to make of these. No theory expressed here that I can conjure up seems to cover the whole of the experiences. Even if we chalk a large swath of the stories up to pure fantasy, the question of the archetype remains. Like, why are the descriptions so similar across so many cultures, so many epochs of civilization? I don't know. And then some other notes about reading this out loud that aren't important. So those are my general thoughts, which are like, yeah, you can explain some of this away if they're curious or they were making up superstitions or this and that. But why the hell are they making up the same superstitions all around the world for centuries?
Yeah.
You know? So anyway, that's the preamble. I'm happy to start digging in. If you all are ready.
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right. I'm not going to, so just for the record, I'll eventually send this document around. I'm not going to mention every time where I got it and all that, but I did cite a summary of the author and where I pulled the source from every time.
Yeah.
I used to want to be an academic, and so I think that's important. But anyway, I'm not going to go through that, but most of it's from sacred text or Gutenberg, those sorts of places. But anyway.
Okay.
If anybody wants to check my work, you're free to do so. Okay. So the first 3 are absolutely ridiculous because they sound outrageous, and then you're going to discover hours into this that there are similarities drawing back to ancient Greece. But let's begin in ancient Greece. The Iliad by Homer, 8th century BC. The first paragraph of book 3 says, "When the companies were thus arrayed, each under its own captain, the Trojans advanced as a flight of wild fowl or cranes that screamed overhead where rain and winter drive them from flowing waters of Oceanus to bring death and destruction on the pygmies. And they wrangle in the air as they fly. But the Achaeans, marching silently in high heat and minded to stand by one another." So pygmies and cranes, okay? Cranes are killing pygmies. That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, that was 8th century BC approximately. I don't really know. Anyway. Okay. History of Animals by Aristotle. You're up to 4th century BC. Aristotle confirms the existence of the pygmies in chapter 14, book 8 of the History of Animals. The cranes do this, for they travel from Scythia to the marshes in the higher parts of Egypt, from which the Nile originates. Ding, ding, ding. This is the place where the pygmies dwell, and this is no fable, for there is really, as it is said, a race of dwarves with both men and horses, which lead the life of troglodytes. The pelicans also are migratory and leave their summer strymon for the Easter, where they rear their young. They depart in great crowds, and those that are before wait for those behind. For in flying over the mountains, those behind cannot see the leaders. So, again, pygmies and dwarves, I believe tied to birds. All right, and now the most fun of the ancient Greek. Pliny the Elder, Natural History, Volume 2. The Wonderful Forms of Different Nations. This is great stuff. Beyond these people, and at the very extremity of the mountains, the Trispithemi and the pygmies are said to exist. 2 races which are but 3 spans in height, that is to say, 27 inches only. They enjoy a salubrious atmosphere and a perpetual spring, being sheltered by the mountains from the northern blasts. It is these people that Homer has mentioned as being waged war upon by cranes. It is said that they are in habit of going down every spring to the seashore in a large body, seated on the backs of rams and goats, and armed with arrows, and there destroy the eggs and the young of those birds. That this expedition occupies them for the space of 3 months, and that otherwise it could be impossible for them to withstand the increasing multitudes of the cranes. Their cabins, it is said, are built of mud, fixed with feathers and eggshells. Aristotle indeed says that they dwell in caves, but in all other respects, he gives the same details as other writers. And then he follows by saying a little later, by the departure of the cranes, which was, as we have already stated, were in the habit of waging war with them, the nation of the pygmies now enjoys a respite. The tracks over which they travel must be immense, if we only consider that they come all the way from the Eastern Sea. So that's 3 ancient Greek sources stretching, I don't know, hundreds of years, referring to pygmies and cranes in an ongoing war with one another. So I'm glad we've started on firm footing.
Yeah, you got to love how Pliny is kind of like, listen, like this is what the science says. And he's like citing previous people. He's like, we know this war is happening.
They've been seated on the backs of rams and goats, and they're armed with arrows. What more do you want to know?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's unreal. So that's that. Everybody remember that has been said in ancient Greece, because we're not going to hear about it for a while, and then suddenly you're going to go, holy shit, those birds again. Anyway.
Okay.
So just continuing on through this document, The Travels of Sir John Mandeville by, I'm guessing, presumably somebody named Sir John Mandeville. This is one of those books that was like a travelogue. This is 1357, okay? It's a travelogue where he says things like this. So, and in another isle toward the south dwell folk of foul stature and of cursed kind that have no heads, and their eyen be on their shoulders. And in another isle be folk that have great ears and long that hang down to their knees. You know, so it's got these sorts of descriptions of people, you know what I mean? Another isle be folk that have horses' feet. And so we're taking all that with a grain of salt, right? These are the sorts of stories that are being told in this book, right? Fine. Yeah, okay. But it does include this fantastic, here we go. That river goeth through the land of pygmies, where that the folk be of little stature, that be but 3 span long, 3 span again, and they be right fair and gentle after their quantities, both the men and the women, and they marry them when they be half year of age and get children, and they live not but 6 year nor 7 at the most, and he that liveth 8 year men hold him here right passing old. These men be the best workers of gold, silver, cotton, silk, and all such things, and any other that be in the world. And they have oftentimes war with the birds of the country that they take and eat. This little folk neither labor in lands nor nay in vines, but they have great men amongst them of our stature that till the land and labor amongst the vines for them. And of those men our stature have, as they great a scorn and wonder as we would have as us giants, if they were among us. So we're giants in compared to them.
Yeah.
There's a good city amongst others where there's dwelling and great plenty of these little folk. And it is a great city affair, and the men be great that dwell amongst them. All right, you get the idea. So that's a source I would disregard as being historically accurate, except there it is saying some things that are then correlated with.
Yeah.
So those are the most ridiculous of the old ones. Everything moving forward from here gets into sort of mostly 19th century stuff. I started with broadly across Europe just to paint a broad picture of how it was similar in Northern Europe all the way up through Denmark, through Germany, all the way across to then the UK, which we get into in a bit more length. Where are we on? How much time is in this segment?
We're at like 21 minutes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to start in on this and see what happens.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So this is the book, The Fairy Mythology, illustrative of the romance and superstition of various countries by Thomas Keightley from 1870. So Thomas Keightley was an Irish writer known for his work on mythology and folklore. He lived from 1789 to 1872. This came out in 1870. So I'm presuming this is something like his big work, right?
Yeah.
It is massive, and it does a bunch of quoting from different countries. So we're kind of just going to move country by country, so it'll naturally break up a bit. So here we go. From the introduction, we find in most countries a popular belief in different classes of beings distinct from men and from the higher orders of divinities. These beings are usually believed to inhabit, in the caverns of the earth or the depths of the waters, a region of their own. They generally excel mankind in power and knowledge, and like them are subject to the inevitable laws of death, though after a more prolonged period of existence. It is not our intention in the following pages to treat of the awful or lovely deities of Olympus, Valhalla, or Meru. Our subject is less aspiring, and we confine ourselves to those beings who are our fellow inhabitants of earth, whose manners we aim to describe and whose deeds we propose to record. We write of fairies, faves, elves, and something in Latin I realize now I forgot to look up. So that doesn't help, that part at the end. If anybody knows Latin, aut alio quo nomine gaudens. I know nomine means name.
I don't know that one.
Okay. Yeah. All right. In the collection of England stories, under the broader UK section, the author relays the story of the fairy banquet. So this is a common story.
Yeah.
I included this because, anybody looking into this has come across this story. This is reproduced in several ways across the UK, and I just got a low battery on my headphones, Russ. This is getting fun.
Uh-oh. That's all right. We could take a break when we need to. It doesn't have to be exactly 30 minutes. Yeah.
All right. So we'll try to get through this, the story from Yorkshire.
Okay.
Hey, Yorkshire. In the province of Derry in Yorkshire, not far from the birthplace, a wonderful thing occurred, which I have known from my boyhood. There is a town a few miles distant from the Eastern Sea, near which are those celebrated waters commonly called Gipps. A peasant of this town went once to see a friend who lived in the next town, and it was late at night when he was coming back, not very sober. When lo, from the adjoining borough, which I have often seen, and which is not much over a quarter of a mile from the town, he heard the voices of people singing, and as it were, joyful feasting. He wondered who they could be when they're breaking in that place by their merriment, the silence of the dead night, and he wished to examine into the matter more closely. Seeing a door open in the side of the barrow, he went up to it and looked in, and there he beheld a large and luminous house, full of people, women as well as men, who were reclining as at a solemn banquet. One of the attendants, seeing him standing at the door, offered him a cup. He took it, but would not drink, and pouring out the contents, kept the vessel. A great tumult arose at the banquet on account of his taking away the cup, and all the guests pursued him. But he escaped by the fleetness of the beast he rode, and got into town with his booty. Finally, this vessel of unknown material, of unusual color, and of extraordinary form was presented to Henry the Elder, King of the English, as a valuable gift, and was then given to the Queen's brother David, King of the Scots, and was kept for several years in the treasury of Scotland, and a few years ago, as I've heard from good authority, it was given to William, King of Scots, to Henry II, who wished to see it. Yeah. So that I saw reproduced multiple times. The thing I find interesting about that, obviously, the gifting of something, the retrieval of something, but then its reverence among the community such that it was Henry the Elder, King of the English, to his brother David, King of the Scots, is taken seriously by those.
That's like the fairy flag, right? There's a, is it in a museum or a castle? There's a place somewhere in the UK where you can go see the fairy flag. It has the same kind of story, right? That it was a gift.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. In fact, honestly, the fairy flag, I've definitely come across that. It may be in here. I don't believe so. The cup is definitely one. There are other stories from other parts of the world where there seems to be a thing given.
Yeah. And it's
and
all,
more even in,
when you hear these stories too, I always think of, when I'm reading these kinds of stories, I always think like, this is the one we know because he got away. Right. So it's like, if you like get rid of your disbelief for a minute and you think, okay, so these stories could be in some way true or some kind of true encounter, how many of them happen where the person, all they have to do is take a drink and that's it, right? If he would have drank from that cup, the stories say that's it. You're stuck there after that. You're stuck in the fairy realm if you take their food or you take their drink. So this guy was smart enough to pour it out, and he gets away with a treasure. So a lot of the stories that you hear are people who are clever.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the little people are also known for absolutely taking people.
Yes.
That is one of the things they're known for. So, that's confirmed on the other end,
Right. Yeah. Well, do you want to take a break? You said you got a battery alarm in your headphones there.
Yeah. We probably should. We have a few more in this section, but yeah, I think it's going well as long as that's long enough for the first.
Yeah,
segment.
that's great, man. Yeah, thank you. This is
all good, bro.
This is fun.
I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. So, like, am I allowed to request bumper music or anything?
Yeah.
Is that kind of thing
Absolutely.
I get to do?
Hey, first time. What do you want to hear?
Listen, it's not what I want to hear. It's who. I don't know this Dozer Dan, but I know that every time he's on a track, it is awesome. Every time I've heard him referenced, it's always something boss, and it's great. So
you got it.
I don't know who that dude is, but get him on some tracks.
Okay.
Oh,
He wants to hear old bassman Dan.
He's up in the dust on a hill somewhere, old boy. We'll be right back. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Brothers of the Serpent podcast, joined by LP McQuack of the Discord, a.k.a. Drew. Talking about the little folk. And I just brought a giant beer.
A giant Jurassic Chuck beer.
Thanks to Chuck. Had some frozen glasses. So, Drew, you got a beer going?
Dude, I got a beer going, man. It's not petrified. It's less petrified than y'all's. It's good.
It's a tradition here on the podcast, folks.
Right. Shout out to Wiseacre Brewery in Memphis, Tennessee. Yeah.
Look at that.
That's a frosty glass, gentlemen.
Frosty.
Yeah.
Only the frostiest for the Snake Bros.
All right.
Ooh. All right. Cheers, fellas.
Yeah.
Cheers, brother.
Cheers.
Yeah.
All right. So where we left it, I'd relayed that story from the UK, and I tucked it into this section about Europe, and I realized why, because it says so in the next sentence. The author's that story that came from the UK. The author puts it in context by saying this. The scene of this legend we may observe is in the very country in which the Danes settled, and it is exactly the same of the legends current at the present day among the Danish peasantry. It is really extraordinary to observe the manner in which popular traditions and superstitions will thus exist for centuries. So I put that one in there despite it being UK, purely because the author then says, yeah, it's just like the ones we got in Denmark, you know?
Yeah.
So, all right.
here we go. Moving forward, although this is still kind of UK stuff, but it gives a great description of the classic brownie. I believe it's Scottish brownie. But anyway, so quoting here, the nis, kobold, or goblin appears in Scotland under the name of brownie. A brownie is a personage of small stature, wrinkled visage, covered with short curly brown hair and wearing a brown mantle and hood. His residence is the hollow of the old tree, a ruined castle, or the abode of man. He is attached to particular families with whom he has been known to reside, even for centuries, threshing the corn, cleaning the house, and doing everything done by his northern and English brethren. He is to a certain degree disinterested. Like many great personages, he is shocked at anything approaching to the name of a bride or doucher, I don't know that word. Yet, like them, allows his scruples to be overcome if the thing be done in a genteel, delicate, and secret way. Thus, offer Brownie a piece of bread, a cup of drink, or a new coat and hood, and he fired at it, and perhaps in his huff quitted the place forever, to leave a nice bowl of cream and some fresh honeycomb in a snug, private corner, and they soon disappeared, though Brownie, it was to be supposed, never knew anything of them. A good woman had just made a web of linsey-woolsey, and prompted by her good nature, had manufactured from it a snug mantle and hood for her little Brownie. Not content with laying the gift in one of his favorite spots, she indiscreetly called to tell him it was there. This was too direct, and the Brownie quitted the place, crying, "A new mantle and a new hood, poor Brownie, you'll never do more good." I don't really get that last part. But yeah, I like that description. Small stature, wrinkled visage, covered with short curly brown hair. These covered in a mantle and hood. Some of these things will return.
Yeah, very secretive too.
Yeah, that whole ridiculous charade, like what you were saying, the drinking of something or the not drinking of it. There's all these indirect ways of dealing with them.
Yes.
You know?
Yep. You can get them on your side. You can piss them off. And there's all kinds of strange little traditions about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they seem to be similar, which it's as if it's really the thing I keep returning to is that it's as if something weird is happening here.
Yes,
but anyway,
exactly.
Yeah. So in the same section on Scandinavia, the author describes the nisses. So, all right, here we go. The nis is the same being that is called kobold in Germany, brownie in Scotland, and whom we shall meet in various other places under different appellations. He is in Denmark and Norway also called Nisse God Drang, or the Nisse Good Lad. And in Sweden, oh boy, Tomtegube, old man of the house, or briefly, Tomta. He is evidently of the dwarf family, as he resembles them in appearance, and like them, has the command of money and the same dislike to noise and tumult. He is of the size of a year-old child, but has the face of an old man. Mm-hmm. His usual dress is gray, with a pointed red cap, but on Michaelmas Day, he wears a round hat like those of the peasants. No farmhouse goes on well unless there is a nis in it, and well it is for the maids and men who they are in favor with him. They may go to their beds and give themselves no trouble about their work, and yet in the morning the maids will find the kitchen swept up and water brought in, and the men will find the horses in the stable well cleaned and curried, and perhaps a supply of corn cribbed for them from the neighbors' barns. He punishes them for any irregularity that takes place. The nisses of Norway, we are told, are fond of the moonlight, and in the wintertime they may be seen jumping over the yard or driving in sledges. They are also skilled in music and dancing, and will, it is said, give instructions on the fiddle for a gray sheep. All right. Great.
So
every church, too, has its nis who looks to order and chastises those who misbehave, and he is called the Kirkegrim. That's it. Honors. Okay. So these same nisses are described in the city of Vosburg in Jutland, peninsula in Denmark. So, all right. So now we're moving into the nisses in Denmark. Okay. There was once an exceeding great number of nisses in Jutland. Those in Vosburg in particular were treated with so much liberality that they were careful and solicitous beyond measure for their master's interests. They got every evening in their sweet grout a large lump of butter. In return for this, they once showed great zeal and gratitude. One very severe winter, a lonely house in which there were 6 calves was so completely covered by snow that for the space of 14 days no one could get into it. When the snow was gone, the people naturally thought that the calves were all dead of hunger, but far from it. They found them all in excellent condition, the place cleaned up and the cribs full of beautiful corn, so that it was quite evident the nisses had attended them. So, I'm going to just cut out the next paragraph or two.
So
to
where
dwell on this.
where would the, like, this seems interesting to me. Where would these stories come from of places where people have to do less work because of some supernatural beings, right? In other words, like, it just seems strange that, like, you know, in a time period where you're spending a lot of time with your cattle or cleaning the house or whatever, like all this stuff people have to do, like except that there's some places where it's just done when you wake up in the morning, you know?
Right.
Like, that seems like a strange or interesting tradition.
Yeah, the thing that it was making me think of was like some kind of fairy tale to make people be clean and tidy and stick on a schedule, because it's like they don't like any change. Like, don't deviate from the plan.
Yeah.
So in other words, like, chaos has a cost.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
So, like, if you stick to a schedule and you're clean and tidy or whatever, then it actually saves you a lot more work or something like that. I was just thinking of, like, you know, obviously nothing, like, how would this story arise in a,
like, in other words, if you're
society.
a fastidious and tidy person, then when you wake up in the morning, everything's just magically clean. It's like, is that what you're
I know,
saying?
but yeah, I was thinking of it more in like a reason to sort of talk about how that saves time and is less work in the long run. But, you know, that's just not actually talking about little people.
And that actually is reinforced in at least one later story where they talk about someone's firsthand encounter of making a deal with a little person to be their best friend. And then eventually they get tired of playing with that person, and so that it has consequences too. So it has that sort of thing of like, no, we had a deal of regularity, and if you break that, then, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, but it's also the thing of the story isn't one of your work will be done faster. It's the work is already done before you go to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's different.
Anyway. Yeah. But yeah, it's weird. But the thing is, you know what it sounds like? It sounds like a bunch of farmers systematically, one at a time over the course of a few centuries, woke up and all the work was done one day. And they were like, what?
Yes.
Hey, did you guys notice that weird thing that happened the other day when all the work was done? Anyway. So yeah. All right. Here's this is the next few are definitely some of my favorite from around. There's a couple really good ones too coming up on a changeling. So just strap in, folks. All right. So the nisses, as described above, are very similar to the Scandinavian elves. So the nisses these are distinct. It's also where that comes up a lot too. Distinctions between, oh yeah, but those are these sorts of little people, and those are a different sort of people. So that's fascinating all on its own. But okay, so the elves in Scandinavia. The Alfar, which presumably is elves, the Alfar still live in the memory and traditions of the peasantry of Scandinavia. They also, to a certain extent, retain their distinction into white and black. The former, or the good elves, dwell in the air, dance on the grass, or sit in the leaves of trees. The latter, or evil elves, are regarded as an underground people who frequently inflict sickness or injury on mankind, from which there is a particular kind of doctors called Pokémon, to be met with in all parts of the country. The elves are believed to have their kings and to celebrate their weddings and banquets just the same as the dwellers above ground. There is an interesting intermediate class of them in popular tradition called the hill people, or hugfolk, who are believed to dwell in caves and small hills. When they show themselves, they have a handsome human form. The common people seem to connect with them a deep feeling of melancholy, as if bewailing a half-quenched hope of redemption.
A half-quenched
Half-quenched hope of redemption.
Hope of redemption.
Yeah. Like, well, I don't really know what to do with that. Yeah. The Norwegians call the elves Huldrefolk, and their music Huldreslåt. This is great here. Are you ready? It is in the minor key and of a dull and mournful sound. The mountaineers sometimes play it and pretend they have learned it by listening to the underground people among the hills and rocks. There is also a tune called the Elf King's Tune, which several of the good fiddlers know right well, but never venture to play. For as soon as it begins, both old and young, and even inanimate objects are impelled to dance, and the player cannot stop unless he can play the air backwards, or that someone comes behind him and cuts the strings of his fiddle.
Yeah.
That's awesome stuff.
Yeah. Wow.
The little underground elves who are believed to dwell under the houses of mankind are described as sportive and mischievous and as imitating all the actions of men. They are said to love cleanliness about the house and place and to reward such servants as are neat and cleanly. The elves are extremely fond of dancing in the meadows, where they form these circles of a livelier green, which from them are called the elf dance. When the country people see in the morning stripes along the dewy grass in the woods and meadows, they say the elves have been dancing. So that's a nice, easy 1-to-1, right?
Yeah.
If anyone should at midnight get within the circle, they become visible to him, and they may then elude him. It is not everyone that can see the elves, and one person may see them dancing while another perceives nothing. Sunday children, as they're called, i.e. those born on Sunday, are remarkable for possessing this property of seeing elves and similar beings. The elves, however, have the power to bestow this gift on whomsoever they please.
Yeah.
People also used to speak of elf books which they gave to those whom they loved and which enabled them to foretell future events. All right, just a couple more paragraphs here. The elves sit in little stones that are of a particular form and are called elf mills. The sound of their voice is said to be sweet and soft like the air. All right, and then here's another story from the Danish peasantry real quick. The El people live in the El moors. The appearance of the man is that of an old man with a low-crowned hat on his head. The El woman is young and of a fair and attractive countenance, but behind she is hollow like a doe trot. Young men should be especially on their guard against her, for it is very difficult to resist her. And she has, moreover, a stringed instrument, which when she plays on it, quite ravishes their hearts. The man may often be seen near the Elmores, bathing himself in the sunbeams. But if anyone comes too near to him, he opens his mouth wide and breathes upon them, and his breath produces sickness and pestilence. The women are most frequently to be seen by moonshine. Then they dance their rounds in the high grass so lightly and so gracefully that they seldom meet a denial when they offer their hand to a rash young man. It is also necessary to watch cattle, that they may not graze in any place where the El people have been. For if any animal come to a place where the El people have spit or done what is worse, it is attacked by some grievous disease which can only be cured by giving it to eat a handful of St. John's wort, which had been pulled at 12 o'clock on St. John's night. It may also happen that they might sustain some injury by mixing to the El people's cattle, which are very large and of a blue color, and which may sometimes be seen in the fields licking up the dew on which they live. But the farmer has a remedy against this evil, for he only has to go to the El hill when he is turning on his cattle and say, "Thou little troll, may I graze my cows on the hill?" And if he's not inhibited, then he may lay his mind to rest.
There's so many weird things in that.
Yeah.
So many strange things.
Yeah.
The hollow woman is a really interesting idea. Yeah. And then, of course, the blue cattle.
Hollow like a doe trough.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The blue cow. What does that remind you of?
They have the big blue ox.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. It's so weird. Then there's the relationship to music, which will come up again. Music and dance is good, but I really appreciated that. First of all, it puts it in a minor key. I like that. It's good to know, just in case. But I like the idea of there being a folk story about, I'll teach you this song, but listen, you can never play this song.
Yeah.
And everybody knows it, but you can't play it because if you do, you know what I mean? Like that's...
Yeah.
It's cool.
Or that they've
it's like learning the intro to Stairway.
Or that,
Look, you can learn it, but like, you don't go playing this for people.
No
Nobody
Stairway.
really wants to hear it.
Yeah, or that they've heard it coming up out of the ground, and so that, like anyone who all the really good players know the song, but they never play it.
Right. Oh, and then it's the two kinds of elves. There's the ones who are above ground who are good, and below ground who are evil.
Yeah. Yep.
You know. All right. So just continuing through Scandinavia here. These are some really fun stories coming. Two of my favorites coming up here. So, okay. Description of the dwarves and trolls continues. The trolls are represented as dwelling inside of hills, mounds, and hillocks, whence they are also called hill people. Sometimes in single families, sometimes in societies. In the ballads, they are described as having kings over them, but never so in the popular legend. Their character seems gradually to have sunk down to the level of peasantry in proportion as the belief in them was consigned to the same class. That's interesting. They are regarded as extremely rich for when, on great occasions of festivity, they have their hills raised up on red pillars. People that have chanced to be passing by have seen them shoving large chests full of money to and fro and opening and clapping down the lids of them. Their hill dwellings are very magnificent inside. They live, said one of Mr. Arndt's guides. I don't know who Mr. Arndt is, but anyway, he's quoting from somebody here. They live in fine houses of gold and crystal. My father saw them once in the night when the hill was open on St. John's night. They were dancing and drinking, and it seemed to him as if they were making signs to him to go to them. But his horse snorted and carried him away, whether he would or no. There's a great number of them in the Goldberg, the Gold Hill, and they have brought into it all the gold and silver that people buried in the Great Russian War. They're obliging and neighborly, freely lending and borrowing, and elsewise keeping up a friendly intercourse with mankind. But they have a sad propensity to thieving, not only stealing provisions, but even women and children.
Yeah.
Right? They marry, have children, bake and brew, just as the peasant himself does. A farmer one day met a bill man and his wife and a whole squad of stumpy little children in his fields. And people used to often see the children of the man who lived in the hill of Kund in Jutland, climbing up the hill and rolling down one after the other with shouts of laughter. These beings have some very extraordinary and useful properties. They can, for instance, go about invisibly or turn themselves into any shape. They can foresee future events. They can confer prosperity, or the contrary, on a family. They can bestow bodily strength on anyone, and in short, perform numerous feats beyond the power of man. Of personal beauty, they have not met their boast. The Ebeltoft dwarves mentioned above were often seen, and they had immoderate humps on their backs and long crooked noses. They were dressed in gray jackets, and they wore pointed red caps. Old people in Zealand say that when the trolls were in the country, they used to go from their hill to the village of Gudmundstrup through the stone meadow, and that people, when passing that way, used to meet great tall men in long black clothes. Some have foolishly spoken to them and wished them good evening, but they never got any other answer than that the trolls hurried past them, saying, me, 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 me. Yeah.
Every
so there's
time,
a few good things in there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm just saying, every time I've read collections of these stories, they're just so weird. You know, all of them are so strange. I mean, do you think it's just cultural? Like at this point that we look back on these stories, they're not that old, right? But is it a cultural problem that they look so strange? Or do you think that this was just as strange to the people back then as it seems to us now?
Well, I think it is definitely a situation of want something. 100%.
Okay.
Like, I think that these stories Yeah, I agree with you. People in the late 19th century, they're a lot like us, right? They'd already experienced some of the Industrial Revolution. They were into nation states. Like they understood where they were in the world, not too dissimilar from where we're able to understand our own relation to the world.
Yeah.
They held on to these stories, and I'm sure in holding on to them went, yeah, my grandfather told me this, and then this is what happened. They ran away saying me, 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 me.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know what that means, but I'm holding on to it, you know?
Yeah.
So I definitely think that's a component in it. But the thing that I just can't get, these similarities though, like why are they so weird in the same ways?
Right. Yeah. Right.
Why do they live in large crystal palaces underground? Well, what is that? What is that? Real?
Yeah, it's similar to the UFO stuff in the sense that it's like, okay, the stories are weird, but a lot of them are weird in the same way, right? It's the same kind of thing, which makes you feel like there's a pattern or there's some kind of seed of something. that this is interacting with reality in some way. These stories are, whatever that might
Absolutely.
be. I don't know. Yeah.
But you do get into then the question of, okay, so then it was a quant stuff. I can buy that. Well, they held on to the story, but it lost what some of the details of it meant.
Yeah.
Well, why would a person, an individual, or a people hold on to stories with such accuracy, even though they're losing meaning over time? And the only thing, the most obvious thing I could think of as to the reason for that would be that, well, at the core of it is some really weird thing that we think really happened.
Yeah.
You have to assume the people are a lot like you and me in that they have the same understanding of this is kind of weird, especially for the stuff from the sort of 19th, 20th century.
Yeah.
But man, I don't know.
Yeah, and sometimes I've often wondered if, because like earlier you were talking about how maybe there's a telephone effect, right? That, or maybe things get added or lost as they're told and retold. But sometimes when you're going through these, I get the idea that like maybe the only thing that's been added here is my grandfather's cousin's brother saw this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, in other words, you could tell the whole story and have it be coming from some very old source. And then at the end you say, oh yeah, somebody that I know that knows this guy or whatever claims that this happened to him. That's the part that gets added. Yeah. In other words, they're just like, let's give it a little bit. That's the whole, like, the William Wallace killed 50 men, right? It's like they're telling a totally untrue story, but it isn't totally untrue. He did kill a lot of dudes. So it's like, which part of it is the false, is the part that gets added or that gets embellished? I don't know. Maybe some of these people did know. I mean, the stories have to come from somewhere, but if it is quant stuff of some kind, that makes me think that it's talking about that it may be discussing processes or actual encounters with phenomena or entities that are in some way they interact with people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's mentioned multiple times in some stuff we've already read that will come up later that they seem to be representative of the people that they interact with. In fact, something of their nature.
Yeah. Yeah, like you were saying in there that they seem to have gone from nobility down to peasantry because the stories also went from the nobility down to the peasantry.
And the nobility had stopped telling them, but the peasantry had maintained. And there's also, it's come up multiple times that they seem to be particularly jubilant. Hey, the good people are particularly jubilant on feast days.
Feast days.
St. John's Day and I think Michaelmas Day, which I don't know what Michaelmas Day, but I'm guessing it's something akin to Christmas because Moss is in there. I don't know. Or a feast of St. Michael or something. Okay. Here comes a fun one. This is a story about Scotty. Scotty's in the fire. It's a great story. All right. Near Goodmanstrup, in the district of Arn, is a bill called Hugh The hill folk that dwell in this mount are well known in all the villages around, and no one ever omits making a cross on his beer barrels, for the trolls are in habit of slipping down from Hugh to steal beer. One evening late, a farmer was passing by the bill. I think bill just means hill.
Yeah.
And he saw that it was raised up on red pillars. That was mentioned once before. No idea what the red pillars mean. Okay. And that underneath there was music and dancing and a splendid troll banquet. The man stood a long time gazing on their festivity, and while he was standing there, deeply absorbed in the admiration of what he saw, all of a sudden the dancing stopped, and the music ceased, and he heard a troll cry out in the tone of the utmost anguish, "Scotty has fallen into the fire! Come and help him up!" The hill then sank, and all the merriment was at an end. Meanwhile, the farmer's wife, so it was the farmer that saw this, right? Okay. Farmer's wife was at home all alone, and while she was sitting and spinning her toe, she never noticed a troll who had crept through the window into the next room and was at the beer barrel, drawing off the liquor into his copper kettle. The room door was standing open, and the troll kept a steady eye on the woman. The husband now came into the house full of wonder at what he had seen and heard. "Hark ye, dame," he began. "Listen." Yeah, oh boy. "Listen now till I tell you what has happened to me." The troll redoubled his attention. "As I came just now by Hugh continued, I saw a great troll banquet there, but while they were in the very middle of their glee, they shouted out within the hill, Scotty has fallen into the fire! Come and help him up! At hearing this, the troll, who was standing beside the beer barrel, was so frightened that he let the tap run and the kettle of beer fall on the ground, and tumbled himself out of the window as quickly as might be. The people of the house, hearing all that noise, instantly guessed what had been going on inside, and when they went in, they saw the beer all running about and found the copper kettle lying on the floor. This they seized and kept in lieu of the beer that had been spilled, and the same kettle is said to have been a long time to be seen in the villages around.
So people are passing around this copper kettle that's supposed to be a fairy kettle.
Right.
That's just great.
But Scotty's in the fire. What
Yeah.
happened? He fell in the fire.
Right.
But then the news. I love the fact that it's so the Fae, the dwarves, are getting their news from what we're telling each other in this context.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And it freaks him out. It freaks the troll out, which makes you
That's
wonder like what actually was said. Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to skip one or two of these little paragraphs because I'm going to get to the changeling. This is some wild stuff. Changeling stuff is kind of hard to read, in all honesty, because as a father, I'm sure Kyle would echo this. You do get this idea of like, man, some people really took this seriously, and these are some pretty hard sentences to take seriously.
Yeah, that's changeling. You know what I mean? The changeling stories can be awful. I agree. Yeah, and also here
we go.
It's the changeling stories and the midwife stories are terrible sometimes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but actually, I think there's a midwife story at some point that I came across, which was actually quite nice.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, they're not always.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I've got two changeling stories here, and those are the last two from this book. So we'll see where that gets us.
Cool. Well,
all right.
We can do that after the next break.
Yeah.
Got me.
Gotcha. All right. Well, we'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
Playing in a major key. Oh, Sweet Dreams, Chuck, by the way.
old penny whistle. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Second hour, Brothers of the Serpent podcast. We are joined by Drew, talking about the little people, the fae folk, the she. And I think the idea here, and we're getting into it, is looking at the patterns across many of the stories. So once again, similar to the UFO stuff, similar to the missing 411 thing, like there's the crossover here is there a pattern, and does it have an original source? Does it have a source that's based somehow in reality? And I think we're moving on to changelings now, right, Drew? That's where we're going?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the next, with the way this document came together, next couple ones are on changelings and a little more from Europe. And then after that, the whole section dives into the stories of the Fae in the UK, but in particular to what authors, intellectuals, and different people for about 30, 40 years, what they said about it, like what they thought these stories came from. Spoiler alert, they're all wrong. Okay. All right, here are the changeling stories. So I got two of them. They're pretty wild. Here we go. All right, first one is from Germany. I believe they're both from Germany, but I could be wrong there. Yeah, both Germany. Here we go. All right. It was belief in some parts of Germany that if a child that was not thriving were taken to a place called Syriac's Mead near Neuhausen and left lying there and given to drink out of Syriac's well, at the end of 9 days, it would either die or recover. Well, shit. The butler and cook of one of the spiritual lords of Germany, without being married, had a child, which kept crying day and night, and evermore craving for food, and yet it never grew nor throve. It was finally resolved to try it on the effect of Syriac's mead, and the mother set out for that place with the child on her back, whose weight was so great that she could hardly endure it. As she was toiling along under her burden, she met a traveling student, who said to her, "My good woman, what sort of a wild creature is that you are carrying? I should not wonder if it were to crush in your neck." She replied that it was her dear child,
which would not grow nor thrive, and that she was taking it to Newhausen to be rocked. But, said he, that is not your child. It is the devil. Fling it into the stream. But she refused, and maintained that it was her child, and kissed it. Then said he, your child is at home in the inner bedroom in a new cradle behind the ark. Throw, I tell you, this monster into the stream. With many tears and groans, the poor woman at length did as he required, and immediately there was heard under the bridge on which they were standing a howling and a growling, as if wolves and bears were in the place. When the woman reached home, she found her own child healthy and lively and laughing in its new cradle. A Hessian legend tells that as a woman was reaping corn at the Dosenberg with her little child lying near her on the ground, a dwarf woman came and took it and left her own lying in its stead. When the mother came to look after her dear babe, a great, ugly jolterhead was there gaping at her. She cried out and roared, murder, so lustily that the thief came back with the child. But she did not restore it till the mother had put the changeling to her breast and given it some ennobling human milk.
Yeah. That's a common theme in the changeling stories, is that these fae that are switching themselves out or being switched out for babies are wanting human milk for some reason.
Yeah. And also just the longer story. And there's another story. I just included that second little bit because it said a great ugly jolterhead was there, and I just thought that's great stuff there. Like, yeah, you jolterhead. But the story of meeting a traveling student and him saying you need to understand what's happening, get rid of that thing. It's an absolutely grim story that is absolutely positive in the end. What do I do with that? Like she chose to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But when she got home, her baby was there and alive and well and kicking. That's a hard one. I mean, I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's common the common trickiness in the fae stories. Like there's always the ones with the crone, right? So a man or a hunter or whatever meets this horribly ugly, disfigured woman in the woods, and she offers him some deal in return for him lying with her, right? And he's like, ugh. But he needs whatever she's offering, so he agrees to do it. And then when he wakes up in the morning, there's this beautiful woman, and she's like, what crone are you talking about? He's like, where's the old woman? He's like, she's like, what are you talking about? I've always been a beautiful woman. It's like the same thing. Like it seems like something awful is happening, but it turns out good. And yeah, that one with the changeling where she's struggling along trying to carry this, what should be a baby, but it feels like it's like weighing her down like a fully grown thing. And then the guy's like, it's a monster.
Yep.
And she can't tell. Right.
Right. Which actually, it wasn't mentioned in that story, but does tie into something mentioned in prior ones, which is that some will see a little person or a fairy, and some will see nothing at all, and some will see something else. It's almost as if she only saw a baby. Right. But what was really happening was something.
Right, like there's this indication of some kind of illusion or veiling magic, right? That some people can see through, and that, like you were saying, maybe you said this in your introduction, but that the fae can also give you the ability to see through it, right? Right. Some people can see through it, some people can't, and then the fae can give it to you. And like the midwife stories I mentioned before, often. A fairy will come and want a midwife, and she'll be like, I can't, he'll give her a salve or something to rub on her eye to be able to see so that she can deliver the baby. So yeah, again, there's this hint of like some kind of illusion or tricking taking place.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so that is the end of that massive book. That is one of the larger ones that I will quote at some length. And just for those of you paying attention at home, that was The Fairy Mythology, Illustrative of the Romance and Superstition of Various Countries by Thomas Kitely. So the next work we're going to get into, which sort of rounds out the broad strokes of how European fae stories go, is this fantastic collection, or the short I pulled from it at least, Songs of the Russian People by W.R.S. Ralston from 1872.
Well, wait a second. You have a couple of questions at the end of this section, and I think the Red Pillars one is a good question.
Oh, shit. Oh, yeah. I have commentary at the end of each of these. I didn't really read those. Yeah, we can do that. You read it. What's the question here?
Right. So LP's notes and commentary. Lots of different names for very similar experiences. What's with the red pillars and a couple of descriptions. And the vessel from Fairyland was revered and passed to royalty, the copper kettle, from when Scotty fell into the fire also. So yeah, you have, and again, I mentioned the fairy flag. So there's these objects that are claimed to have been taken from the land of the Fae, and are passed around, and they become heirlooms. And we know at least one of them is still around. You can go see it, the fairy flag. Right. I don't think it's very impressive. I've seen pictures of it, but people think it was, the story is basically that it was given to somebody from the fairies.
Yeah, I do have enough. I mean, if you really let your mind go all the way into how weird reality can be, go all the way into Fortean territory. Okay, I can imagine a scenario where you have an experience with some other entity, and then there's a physical thing manifested after that, and you'd revere that. Like, I get that. Okay, you'd revere that. That makes sense. It came from nowhere. Right? Okay. I also get, even though I did say earlier it doesn't make sense, why do they live underground and in crystalline crystal structures? Okay, well, I listen to Snake Bros. I've read the Old Testament. I've read UFO accounts. I understand that sometimes people wind up in a large room filled with light, confronted with entities, and there's 9 orders, and you got to find the guy with the most horns. Like, I get all that. It doesn't make sense, but it's weird as hell, and I get that you're in a place where reality shifted significantly. Yeah. The red pillars, I've never heard red pillars brought up in other things. I don't recall coming across them in any Yuffie accounts. I don't really. I mean, there's 2 pillars. You get Joaquin and Boaz, maybe. Never heard them called red. They're always, I think, more black and white and stuff. I don't know what that is, but it came up in 2 different stories that they're. And one of them was the one where he went up and saw them up on red pillars, but then maybe Scotty fell in the fire, or something happened, and then it descended back into the earth. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I don't know what the red pillars are, but they came up twice.
Well, to me, the idea of it being specifically red pillars is interesting, but it also is like more like a hint of technology. Like, the whole hill is lifted off the ground, and it's being held up by pillar-like structures, and down in there is the fairy dance and feast, right? Yeah. And some people are standing up on the rim watching, and they hear things or whatever, but the idea is, like, this hill is actually a disguised structure. And it's
disguising a fully hollow earth, or just the balloon earth?
It's the banana. Sorry. It's definitely the banana earth.
Banana earth. Yes. The lesser known banana earth.
That's right. Yeah, this was proven. We know that the earth is banana shaped.
Hashtag facts, bro. All right. So let's continue then.
Well,
do you have more? Yeah, let's hear it.
Yeah. So this is not, again, it's like, I feel like my commentary is like, doesn't have anything to do with the Fae folk, but the last story about the woman thinking that her baby was not growing and doing everything properly, and she goes on this trip. To me, that is like, there's like a lesson in human psychology there, right? Like, the mother, trying to turn her baby into something that she's wanting, like something that she is envisioning, and eventually having to go on this, like this journey and
get rid of the burden of her,
overcome her own desire for it to be exactly what she wants, and throw that imagery, of her own mind into the river, and she weeps and cries, whatever. But when she goes home, she sees her true child, right? And now
it's almost like
like a metaphor,
a forest bath for postpartum depression.
Yeah, like I think every parent probably goes through something like this. You want them to be something, and then eventually you have to like let that go and let them be who they are. That's what it made me think of. So that doesn't have anything to do with Fae folk.
I like that. That's less grim.
It is. It's less grim.
Yeah, and it can be like a happy ending, right? When you get rid of this burden.
And you discover your child is healthy and happy.
Exactly. So you think that the mother in that story may have been more like it wasn't necessarily the baby that was the changeling, it was her. She's like the classic like devouring mother, but she goes and gets rid of that tendency. And that's why the student's like, that thing is a monster.
That thing is a monster that you're making.
Yeah. Okay.
And of
Very
course, like,
interesting.
yeah,
I like it.
like the student being a young person, that has
Doesn't have any kids, has no idea what he's talking
exactly
about.
is able to like make her see
Yeah.
what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't
I
know.
like that.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
All right. So the next book.
I guess
Songs
that
Oh.
could be a clue maybe to what the Fae folk or the changelings are, like in terms of spiritual. They're like a spiritual being that attaches to someone, and I don't know. So trying to go back into the weird side, like maybe it is a being that's doing that, that's causing that.
But in this case, it's not actually swapped out for the baby. It's attached itself to the mother.
Yeah, and in her mind, it's the baby.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah,
would be
so-
classic
and
Fae
you-
trickery right there, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Continues it.
All right. Moving on to the Songs of the Russian People. I do need to read the description of this one because the book, despite its title, Songs of the Russian People, is not songs and not Russian, is a trove of Slavic mythology, tradition, folklore, and ethnography. So there it is. Plenty of songs, not only from Russia, but also just these stories from Serbia to Siberia. So, okay. Quoting here, some link from section 2 on demigods and fairies. So you're talking Eastern European. This was written in 1872, so it gives you an idea where we're at. This stuff's great. In Lithuania, the name given to the domestic spirits is Kaukas, a term which has never been thoroughly explained. They are little creatures like the German kobolds, but not more than a foot high. The peasants sometimes make tiny cloaks and bury them in the ground within the cottage. The Kaukas put them on and thenceforward devote their energies to serving the friendly proprietor of the house. But if they are badly used or neglected, they set his homestead on fire. Similar little beings, called krasnyata, or dwarfs, are supposed to exist among the Kashaubis, the Slavic inhabitants of a part of the coast of the Baltic. The Ruthenians reverence in the person of the domovoy, the original constructor of the family hearth. Okay, the domovoy is where it gets good. He has a wife and daughters who are beautiful, as were the Hellenic nymphs, but their favors are deadly to mortal men. In one district of the Vyatkid government, the domovoy is described as a little old man, the size of a 5-year-old boy. He wears a red shirt with a blue girdle. His face is wrinkled, his hair of a yellowish gray, his beard is white, his eyes glow like fire. In other places, his appearance is much the same, only sometimes he wears a blue kaftan with a rose-colored girdle. Everywhere he is given to grumbling and quarreling, and always expresses himself in strong idiomatic phrases. In Lusatia, he takes the form of a beautiful boy who goes about the house dressed in white, and warns its inhabitants by his sad groaning of impending woe. When hot water is going to be poured away, it is customary there to give warning to the domovoy that he may not be scalded. All right. The Russian domovoy hides behind the stove all night, but at night, when all the house is asleep, he comes forth from his retreat and devours what is left out for him. In some families, a portion of the supper is always set aside for him, for if he is neglected, he waxes wroth and knocks the tables and benches about at night. Wherever fires are lighted, there the domovoy is to be found, in baths and in places for drying corn and in distilleries. When he haunts a bath, he is known as a bannock. The peasants avoid visiting a bath at late hours, for the bannock does not like people who bathe at night, and often suffocates them, especially if they have not prefaced their ablutions by a prayer. It is considered dangerous also to pass the night in a corn kiln, for the domovoy may strangle the intruder in his sleep. In the Smolensk government, it is unusual for peasants who quit a bath. It is usual for peasants who quit a bath to leave a bucket of water and a whisk for the use of the domovoy who takes their place. In Poland, it is that the domovoy is so loath to quit a building in which he has taken up his quarters that even if it is burnt down, he still haunts it, continued to dwell in the remains of the stove. And so they say there, in an old stove the devil warms, for the devil and the domovoy are often synonymous terms in the mouths of the people, who regard Satan with more sorrow than anger. In Galicia, the following story is told about the devil in the stove. This is great. There was a hut in which no one would live, for the children of everyone who had inhabited it had died, and so it remained empty. But at last there came a man who was very poor, and he entered the hut and said, "Good day to whomsoever is in this house." "What dost thou want?" cried the old one. "I am poor. I have neither roof nor courtyard," sadly said the newcomer. "Live here," said the old one. "Only tell thy wife to grease the stove every week, and look after thy children that they mayn't lie down upon it." So the poor man settled in that hut and lived in it peacefully with all his family. And one evening, when he'd been complaining about his poverty, the old one took a whole pot full of money out of the stove and gave it. In Galicia and Poland, a belief is current in the existence of an invisible servant who lives in the stove. It's called, iskritki? Iskra is Polish for spark, so it would be like the sparking one or something, I'm guessing. And most zealously performs all sorts of domestic duties for the master of a house. In White Russia, the domovoy is called smok, a snake, one of the forms under which the lightning was most commonly personified. This house snake brings all sorts of good to the master who treats it well and gives it omelets, which would be placed on the roof of the house or on the threshing floor. But if this be not done, the snake will burn the house. It rarely shows itself to mortal eyes, and when it does so, it is generally to warn the heads of the family to which is attached of coming woe. Once upon a time, a servant maid awoke one morning, lighted the fire, and went for her buckets to fetch water. Not a bucket was to be seen. Of course, she thought, a neighbor has taken them. So out she ran to the river, and there she saw the domovoy, a little old man in a red shirt, who was drawing water in her buckets to give the boy more to drink, and he glared ever so at the girl. His eyes burned just like live coals. She was terribly frightened, and ran back again. But at the home there was woe. All the house was in a blaze. It is said that the domovoy does not like to pass the night in the dark, so he often strikes a light with a flint and steel and goes about, candle in hand, inspecting the stables and outhouses. Hence he derives a number of his names. Sometimes he appears as Vazilla, from vozit, to drive, the protector of horses, a being in a shape like a man, but having equine ears and hooves. At other times, as Bagan, he is guardian of the herds, taking up his quarters in a little crib filled for his benefit with hay. On Easter Sunday and the preceding Thursday, he becomes visible and may be seen crouching in a corner of his stall. He is very fond of horses and often rides them all night so that they are found in the morning foaming and exhausted. Sometimes, also, he goes riding on a goat. When a newly purchased animal is brought home for the first time, it is customary in several places to go through the following ceremony. The animal is led to its stall, and then its possessor bows low, turning to each of the four corners of the building in succession, and says, "Here's a shaggy beast for thee, master. Love him. Give him to eat and to drink." And then the cord by which the animal was led is attached to the kitchen stove.
Wow.
So that... that closes out the evidence from just across Europe of similarities, especially some of those obviously from one source. But riding on a goat, that was now...
That's the Greek.
That's 1870
Pygmies.
in Eastern Europe, going all the way back
Yeah.
to ancient Greece. The reverence for the stove within the home sure does feel like a cultural norm that would have been very important. I mean, if you're in that part of the world, you got the Ural Mountains going all the way up to Siberia. You got some serious stuff. The home stove's got to be a serious thing. All of this reverence built around the stove can lead to fires in the house, but then there's snake symbolism. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like you could write a master's thesis on those few hundred words there.
The other thing that I'm seeing too is this connection with the clothing and the colors of the clothing in the various different situations.
Yeah.
And I think something that that would be valuable would be to understand in these local areas where these stories were told, what did these colors mean, right? Because today we can buy clothes of any color. You can have, but in the past there have been times when
Red and blue were like rare.
He's like, where do you get these dyes? Like, how do you make that? Like, you could only get them perhaps if you were wealthy, or maybe, there were certain materials they were making clothes out of that were just this color. And so all the peasants and the poor people had these same colors. So it would be useful in order to understand some of the deeper symbolism of these stories, what these colors mean according to the people who are telling them. Because I'm sure they have meaning. Like, it seems like they're pointing this out for some reason.
Yeah.
but it doesn't just has no symbolic meaning to us.
Yeah, because you're like, big deal. He has a red shirt and
Yeah.
a blue hat.
Yeah,
Who cares?
exactly. But it's possible that at the time people were like, "Whoa, like this," you know,
Yeah.
which it had some kind of meaning.
Yep. What is interesting definitely is the colors have been repeated. Red's been repeated a few times. Green, if it hasn't already, will be, and white is often repeated also.
Yeah.
You don't hear orange, you know?
No orange?
No orange, bro. You don't hear yellow. I'm just saying there are other colors
Orange.
that are
Orange smock bad.
right. Yeah. Or maybe that's it. Maybe it's that everybody that made some clothes out of orange is like, yeah, they're gone, bro.
Right.
You know? They drank from that cup. Scotty fell in the fire with his orange hoodie, you know? Okay. Well, that ends the European section. We're moving into the British Isles, which I would imagine most people who've been exposed to any of this stuff, either through a Snake Rose podcast or others, this will be some of the stuff they're familiar with. So I tried to focus on what people were saying. So, like I said, I believe earlier, a lot of this collection happened, in the 18th century. The documentation of a lot of this. The conversation then turned to the intellectual circles, at least in the UK, trying to figure out what in the hell's going on here. What are all these stories doing the same thing we're doing?
Yeah.
And so they were looking at evidence and come up with hypotheses and then counteracting hypotheses as to what it all is. So I'm happy to start running through that. It all ends with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
I was aware he'd been involved because of those
photos,
fairy photos. Yeah. But his sort of treatise of taking down what others have said and being like, you all are not taking in account of how bizarre this all is. It's quite good. I mean, I don't think I'm going out on a limb by saying Sir Arthur Conan Doyle is a pretty good writer. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think we're in comfortable territory there. All right, we're moving on to the Secret Commonwealth.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah,
so the Secret Commonwealth, for anybody that doesn't know, is awesome. You've talked about it at least once, I'm sure, Russ.
Yeah,
I believe I've heard you talking about it.
Reverend Kirk, famously studied this stuff, and then, of course, started his own legend about himself.
Yep.
And that he was killed by the fairies for publishing their secrets.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so this book, I'll actually just read kind of what I have here. It does give the rundown of when it was printed versus written and those sorts of things. So Robert Kirk, written by a Scottish clergyman in 1691, not committed to print until the early 19th century. So it is an unusually sympathetic account of the denizens of fairyland. The version was issued in 1893 in a very limited edition by renowned folklorist Andrew Lang. I would anybody interested in this sort of stuff, Andrew Lang is great. I believe it was Andrew Lang who did the fairy color books, just like the blue book and purple book and all those sorts of things. Excellent stuff, really good, especially if you got kids into those sorts of stories. They're not the Grimm stories; they're a different set.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So the bibliography of the following little tract is extremely obscure. The title page of the edition of 1815, which we reproduce, gives the date of 1691. Till some printed text of 1691 is discovered, we may doubt then whether the 100 copies published in 1815 are not the original printed edition. So all that is to say the original document does not exist. That is, I believe, at least a little bit important to note. I think that's what it's saying. But they do have some very few from 1815. So I'm not doubting the authenticity necessarily. I'm just saying it is worth noting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So chapter 5 on the introduction on fairies and physical research. So this is 1893. This is Andrew Lang commenting. So this is late 19th century commentary. Okay. The fairy belief, we have said, is a composite thing. On the materials given by tradition, such as the memory, perhaps, of a prehistoric race, and by old religion, as in the thoughts about the pre-Christian Hades, poetry and fancy have been at work. Consumption, lingering disease, unexplained disappearances, sudden deaths have been accounted for by the agency of the fairies or people of peace. If the superstition included no more than this, we might regard it as a natural result of imagination, dealing with facts quite natural in the ordinary course of things. But there are elements in the belief which cannot be so easily dismissed. We must ask whether the abnormal phenomena which have been so frequently discussed, fought over, forgotten, and revived do not enter in the general mass of folklore. They appear most notably in the two branches of Browniedom, of pixies, as they say in Devonshire, who haunted the house, and in the alleged examples of the second sight. The former topic is the more obscure, if not the more curious. Let us examine the occurrences, then, which may have begotten the belief in brownies and in house-haunting pixies or fairies. These appearances may be alleged, on one hand, to be actual facts in nature, the workings of some yet unexplained forces, or they may merely be the consequences of some very old traditional method of imposture, vulgar in itself, but still historical. That form of imposture, again, may be wrought either by conscious agents or consciously and automatically by persons under the influence of somnambulism, that means sleepwalking, or finally the phenomena way in which various cases be due to any one of these three agencies, all of which may possibly be very causae, as conscious imposture and trickery is certainly one vera causa. So that's drifted into Latin. What can you do? All right. In Mr. Kirk's book, we meet, quote, the invisible wights which haunted houses. They throw great stones, pieces of earth and wood at the inhabitants, but hurt them not at all. As we have said, Major in 1518, I don't know what book that is, but he calls these wights fauni or brobni, that is, brownies, and says that they thrash as much grain in one night as 20 men can do, and throw stones about. The legend of their working was common in Scotland, and a correspondent says that in Devonshire the belief in pixies who set the house in order exists among the grandparents of the present generation. But the sportive is more common than the kindly aspects of brownies. Through history, we constantly find them causing objects to move without visible contact and acting in sport, like buffoons and drolls.
Very poltergeisty.
Yes. And
Poltergeisty.
yeah. Poltergeisty.
I've never heard of poltergeists thrashing grain for people, but they definitely throw rocks and they move objects and they hide things.
Right.
So is that the same phenomena? Like, in other words, is like, the poltergeist is basically the same phenomena that people in the past classified as a kind of house brownie?
Well, I would say that one consistency I have noticed across this, especially in the UK, when you have this fae as part of your lived day-to-day life, it takes a lot of things that we have put into separate categories, and it does lump them into a cohesive worldview.
Yeah.
Poltergeist activity, disappearing 411 activity.
Yep.
The experiences of you saw something different. Like, a lot of things get lumped into this as one semi-cohesive worldview or seemingly cohesive worldview in a way that we've partitioned all those things out as distinct phenomena.
Yeah, that's right. Like, we're like, that's aliens, that's ghosts, that's Sasquatch,
right.
And they're just like, nope, it's all the fairies.
It's all the fae, right?
Yeah.
All right, so now we're going to get into the actual things that, I guess, allegedly, we should say, the things that we believe were written by Robert Kirk from 1691. So it's really fun stuff. On the subterranean inhabitants, so chapter 1 from 1691. Their bodies of congealed air are sometimes carried aloft, otherwhiles grovel in different shapes and enter into any cranny or clift of the earth where air enters, to their ordinary dwellings. The earth being full of cavities and cells, are there being no place nor creature but is supposed to have other animals, greater or lesser, living in or upon it as inhabitants. There is no such thing as a pure wilderness in the whole universe. That last sentence I like a lot. Well, he says, and no such thing, but there's no such thing as pure wilderness in the whole universe. Now, that's cutting to the quick of something or other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, all right. Chapter 5 of that work, of what Robert Kirk's work, quoted in full here. Their apparel and speech is like that of the people and country under which they live. So are they seen to wear plaids and variegated garments in the Highlands of Scotland, and swannocks therefore in Ireland. They speak but little, and that by way of whistling, clear, not rough. The very devils conjured in any country do answer in the language of the place. Yet sometimes the subterraneans speak more distinctly than at other times. Their women are said to spin very fine, to dye, to sew, and to embroider. But whether it is as manual operation of substantial refined stuffs, with apt and solid instruments, or only curious cobwebs, impalpable rainbows, and a fantastic imitation of the actions of more terrestrial mortals, since it transcended all the senses of the seer to discern whether
I leave to conjecture as I found it. I actually don't know what the hell that was saying there at the end.
Yeah, I lost him at the end there too.
Yeah, you got real loopy there, but I think it was saying like, and their women will do all these things and make all these things, but manual operation of substantial refined stuff. So I think that would mean like things you can hold.
Yeah.
Or only curious cobwebs, impalpable rainbows. And so I think saying they're able to do all these things, even things that are not of this physical.
Yeah, like they have mastery of the material and the immaterial, I think is what he's trying to say there.
Right.
Yeah.
But the speaking the language of the place, yet sometimes more distinctly than others. I like that.
And wearing the garments of the place also.
Wearing the garments of the place, right? Okay. So the next chapter, again quoted in full.
And I would just ask the question there, like this is going Snake Bros style, but maybe the place is wearing the garments of the Fae in that spot. Like where did the clothes style come from? Is it are the Fae wearing our styles or are we wearing theirs?
Right. Right. So it appears there's this place in Turkey called Göbekli Tepe. And there's a bunch of evidence there that there was agriculture being, if not developed, instituted there very early on in megalithic architecture and those sorts of things. And you get into this, like, where did they get all these ideas from all at once and stuff?
Yeah.
I can't help but remember the story we just read of the Slavic, Eastern European story with the domovoy and the fire hearth in the house and all that. And the house had seemingly been cursed, and all the children kept dying. And then an old man who was penniless showed up and greeted. And then they said, just have your wife take care of the stove. Just tell her to grease it and take care of it. It's almost as if some of the patterns of behavior that we use to build culture are themselves products, or at least explained in some ways as products of this. Some of that, what we talked about early on, is if you live this clean lifestyle, well, the definition of a clean lifestyle is going to be culturally defined, right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's almost a thing as if like maybe whatever's happening here is actually doing something to create the culture that is then reflected in it,
Yeah, exactly. That's like, it's like asking the question of like, is this part of the whole thing where we see this constant influx of ideas into culture?
Right. Yeah.
So is like are we going Fortean here again, or even Bramley?
Mm-hmm.
Like this is part of the process. It's injection of ideas, and they get embedded in stories, and then people, try to maintain these traditions.
Right. Yep. And it's worth noting a lot of the things described in this, those traditions they would be maintaining are things like cribbing corn, threshing wheat.
Yeah.
So, those are very bedrock of culture activities. Okay. All right. Chapter 6 of the same book, quoted in full here. Their men travel much abroad, either presaging or aping the dismal and tragical actions of some amongst us, and have also many disastrous doings of their own, as convocations, fighting, gashes, wounds, and burials, both in the earth and air. They live much longer than we, yet die at last, or at least vanish from that state. 'Tis one of their tenets that nothing perisheth, but, as the sun and year, everything goes in a circle, lesser or greater, and is renewed and refreshed in its revolutions. As 'tis another that every body in the creation moves, which is a sort of life, and that nothing moves, but has another animal moving on it, and so on to the utmost minutest corpuscle that's capable to be a receptacle of life. There's a lot in that. When we were moves, but has another animal moving on it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's whoa.
Yeah, that is.
That's the bicameral mind. That's Freudian id and ego. That's a lot of things that happened since 1691. I tell you that.
Yeah. And I remember when we were going through the fairy faith in Celtic countries that we got into this whole thing, like there were stories where they had told people, we aren't immortal,
right?
But we're not mortal either. They're in between, right? They're above humans and below the angels, is how they put it, in terms of their mortality and their powers.
Mm-hmm.
that's a fascinating description in that it doesn't actually help me understand what the hell's going on.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, oh, but they're under the angels. Well,
Yeah.
all right,
They're above
I mean,
us, but under the angels. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
As long as we get the hierarchy right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, the idea that they have conflicts in their realm, and those conflicts cause natural disasters here. Like, so you have the minute
Right.
scale of, one brownie or pixie that lives in a house and it gets upset because somebody fails to observe some kind of tradition and they set the house on fire. That's the minute scale. But on the cultural scale, in terms of the culture of the Fae, if you can even think of something like that, if they have a war, then it causes a natural disaster or a famine or a plague in the mortal realm, and millions of people die. So
yeah,
I don't know.
What do you think? What do you think this means about nothing moves but another animal upon it or whatever that? What does this mean? What are your thoughts?
Let me read it one more time then. It's just a couple sentences here. "'Tis one of the tenets that nothing perisheth, but as the sun and year, everything goes in a circle, lesser or greater, and is renewed and refreshed in its revolutions." Renewed and refreshed. "As 'tis another that every body in the creation moves, which is a sort of life, and that nothing moves, but has another animal moving on it." And so on, the utmost corpuscle that's incapable to be receptacle of life. I think what that is describing is something that the great John Anthony West described, and you read it. That's where I heard it, which was the whole thing about a duck. And that, like, there's all these individual pieces of a duck that don't know that they're part of a duck, but they collectively make up an entity called a duck.
Yeah.
I think that what this is describing, at least in some way, well, first of all, it may be describing something like your higher self, right? Or an egregore or something like that we've given these sorts of names to. But I think it's also talking about the individual's relation to groups and to communities and to civilizations. Everything, as the sun and year goes in a circle and is renewed and refreshed. So that's your own life on an annual cycle. Then there's death and rebirth aspects of it. But that nothing moves but has another animal moving on it. Your culture defines your time you were born. All of this defines who you are and what moves you're able to make. So I read this as some sort of thing related to you are an entity who is free to make choices, but you're also part of a broader time period, the parameters of which you may not be able to get outside of.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's like I'm reading it a bunch of times here, and it seems like he's trying to describe in scale. Right? Like you have, for example, and this may be a bad example, but you have the earth, and on the earth you have wolves or dogs, and the earth is maybe is a life. But to the wolves and dogs, the earth is not moving, but they are moving upon it. But then on the dogs, you have fleas. To the fleas, the dog doesn't move, but they are moving upon it. So, and that's what he says.
I was going to say. Is this about relativity?
Yeah, that's what he says. He says, and so on to the utmost minutest corpuscle that is capable to be receptacles of life, right? Like all the way down, and each thing has its world, and to that thing, its world doesn't move, even though it itself may be an animal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what does that have to do with the fairies? I don't know.
Well, they're also on the earth.
Yeah.
But all I got, yeah.
Is it break time? By the way,
probably. We
had a
technical
zero mistake
difficulty recording.
Snafu.
Yeah, let's take a break real quick and we'll come back. This is
we'll
great.
break.
Yeah.
And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. The final segment of the final hour of the fastest 2 hours in podcasting.
It is fast.
Yeah, flies. That was actually kind of a long one, that last one.
The last segment.
Sure thing. So we're going to wrap this up. We'll do Space Weather News at the end, but we got a few more things to do on this. What are we calling this? Little people? I don't know what it's called.
Little people, I guess, man.
Yeah. LP's report on the little people.
On the LPs.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie. When I went to eventually send you the email, I was like, yeah, it was. I was like, hey, those are the same letters. Yeah. But yeah, let's, this is great. So we'll quickly finish up, was it Secret Commonwealth. We'll finish up that with quoting chapter 10. And then we'll talk about Shakespeare a little bit. Not because it's the best evidence on fairy folk, but because it's evidence for Shakespeare being pretty wild, right? Okay. Yep. So, and anytime we can drag Shakespeare into some other weird stuff is worth it. Okay, so chapter 10, quoted in full, describes the fairy hills and the treasures. So we're still we're still reading from 1691, Robert Kirk. There be many places called fairy hills, which the mountain people think impious and dangerous to peel or discover, by taking earth or wood from them, superstitiously believing the souls of their predecessors to dwell there. And for that end to say a moat or mount was dedicate beside every churchyard, to receive the souls till their adjacent bodies arise, and so become as a fairy hill, they using bodies of air when called abroad. They also affirm those creatures that move invisibly in a house and hug great stones, but do no much hurt, because counterwrought by some more courteous and charitable spirits that are everywhere ready to defend men, to be souls that have not attained their rest, through a vehement desire of revealing a murder or notable injury done or received, or a treasure that was forgot in the lifetime on earth, but when disclosed to a conjurer alone, the ghost quite removes. So I think it's just full with treasure stuff. But all right, let me finish this up here. In the next country to that of my former residence, about the year 1676, when there was some scarcity of grain, a marvelous elapse in vision strongly struck the imagination of two women in one night, living at a good distance from one another, about a treasure hid in a hill, called, Sithburiach, or Fairy Hill. The appearance of a treasure was first represented to the fancy, and then an audible voice named the place where it was to their awaking senses. Whereupon both arose, and meeting accidentally at the place, discovered their design, and jointly digging, found a vessel as large as a Scottish peck, full of small pieces of good money of ancient coin, which having betwixt them they sold in dishfuls for dishfuls of meal to the country people. Very many of undoubted credit saw, and had of the coin to this day. But whether it was good or bad angel, one of the subterranean people, or the restless soul of him who hid it, that discovered it, and to what end it was done, I leave to the examination of others. So there's a bunch of fooling with money with us. Like they're fooling with us with money. Money is something they can easily get and give, but it's on their own terms in so many ways.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yep.
Also, Joseph Smith.
That also sounds like a. I mean, just having read so many of these different stories and the way that they toy with people,
right?
It sounds like that was a failed attempt at a prank. They tell two different people at the same time, hoping they'll go and fight, but they're like, "Sweet. We both think there's something here. Let's definitely dig." And they work together and they split it, and like nothing bad happens. But it sounds to me like the Fae were playing a trick, hoping to get a good brawl happening, and it didn't take place.
Excellent point. Yeah. Take that.
Yeah.
It was a test.
Yeah, it was a test.
Prank failed.
And again, goodness prevails. All right. All right. So, here we're moving on to Shakespeare for just a little bit. I just quoted a bit of chapter 1 of this book. So this is the book Folklore of Shakespeare by T.F. Thistleton Dyer in 1883. So it's a comprehensive study of the folklore aspects of Shakespeare, providing a full spectrum exposure to the cultural background of Elizabethan society. The Reverend Dyer, who also wrote Folklore of Women, delves into the source of innumerable passages in Shakespeare, which were mysterious even back in Victorian times. Although usually he manages to clear up the mystery, in few instances he has to admit defeat. So he's just going through specific things Shakespeare published as Shakespeare's writings and drawing where those came from in society. That's the whole book, saying, look, Shakespeare talked about this interesting thing that was going on with animals, and this is why Elizabethans thought that about animals, right? Okay. Chapter 1 is on fairies. This is fun stuff. The wealth of Shakespeare's luxuriant imagination and glowing language seems to have been poured forth in the graphic accounts which he has given us of the fairy tribe. Indeed, the profusion of poetic imagery with which he has so richly clad his fairy characters is unrivaled, and the Midsummer Night's Dream holds a unique position insofar as it contains the finest modern artistic realization of the fairy kingdom. Mr. Dowden, in his Shakespeare Primer from 1877, justly remarks, as the two extremes of exquisite delicacy, of dainty elegance, and on the other hand of thick-witted grossness and clumsiness, stand the fairy tribe, and the group of Athenian handicraftsmen. The world of the poet's dream includes the two, a Titania and a Bottom the weaver, and can bring them into grotesque conjunction. No such fairy poetry existed anywhere in English literature before Shakespeare. The tiny elves, to whom a cowslip is tall, for whom the third part of a minute is an important division of time, have a miniature perfection which is charming. They delight in all beautiful and dainty things, and war with things that creep and things that fly. If they be uncomely, their lives are gay and find frolic and delicate revelry. Puck, the jester of fairyland, stands apart from the rest, the recognizable lob of spirits, a rough, fawn-faced, shock-pated little fellow, dainty-limbed shapes around him. Judging, then, from the elaborate account which the poet has bequeathed us of the fairies, it is evident that the subject was one in which he took special interest. Indeed, the graphic pictures he's handed down to us of, now here's quoting from Shakespeare, elves of hills, brooks, standing lakes and groves, and ye that on the sands with printless foot do chase the ebbing Neptune, and do fly him. When he comes back, you dimmy puppets that, by moonshine do the green sour ringlets make, whereof the ewe not bites. So him writing that, Shakespeare writing that, show how intimately he was acquainted with the history of these little people, and what a complete knowledge he possessed of the superstitious fancies which he clustered around them. In Shakespeare's day, too, it must be remembered, fairies were much in fashion, and, as Johnson remarks, common tradition had made them familiar. It has also been observed that well acquainted from the rural habits of his early life with the notions of the peasantry respecting these things, he saw that they were capable of being applied to a production of a species of the wonderful. Hence, as Mr. Howell Phillips has so aptly written, he founded his elfin world on the prettiest of the people's traditions, and has clothed it in the ever-living flowers of his own exuberant fancy. Okay, referring to the fairy mythology in Midsummer Night's Dream, it is described by Mr. Kitely, he's the one I quoted extensively earlier, as an attempt to blend the elves of the village with the fays of romance. His fairies agree with the former in their diminutive stature, diminished indeed to dimensions inappreciable by village gossips, in their fondness for dancing, their love of cleanliness, and their child-abstracting propensities. Like the fays, they form a community ruled over by the princely Oberon and the fair Titania. There is a court and chivalry. Oberon would have the queen's sweet changeling to be a knight of his train to trace the forest wild. Like earthly monarchs, he has his jester, the shrewd and knavish sprite called Robin Goodfellow. So I don't know A Midsummer Night's Dream very well, but all that has to do with A Midsummer Night's Dream. Do you?
Oh, man. I used to. It's been a long time.
But my point in bringing up all this, or including the Shakespeare bit, because there's not that much to it, that whoever Shakespeare was, whatever was behind all that, had a vast knowledge of Fey lore.
Yeah.
Such that he invented a whole style of, or a whole element of poetry, including these fairy elements. Like that quote I just read, no such fairy poetry existed anywhere in English literature before Shakespeare. That's not drawing on a tradition. The fairy stories were there. You know what I'm saying? But that tradition wasn't there, which is all just a way of saying.
Like in other words,
Shakespeare.
in other words, the traditions and the the folklore, the superstitions all existed, but no one had ever written poetry about it before. No one had ever written plays. Is that what you're trying to say?
Right.
Or that's what this author is
exactly.
saying? Yeah.
It's more, that's just more evidence of the Shakespeare thing being weird than it is evidence of the Fae folk stuff. I just want to talk, Shakespeare's weird, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it is interesting that he's pointing out, like, Shakespeare or whoever that person was saw in the Fae lore a way to put the fantastical into his plays, right? So now he can introduce magic and
had it, I believe, the same reflective of class and things too. So that thing of the Fae were reflecting of us, and that seems to be something we came across that all on our own, as that seems to be something existent in the literature, in the storytelling.
I mean, I guess I could say generally about that play that, there's this whole culture amongst the Fae folk that's going on completely unknown to the normal people, right? There's the royalty and the, all the people in the story, and they have all their drama going on, and the Fae folk are kind of up there sort of pulling the strings and manipulating the people down below, but they also have their own drama. There's like their royalty, Oberon and his...
Yeah, and there's jealousy.
So there's all this crazy stuff going on with them, and it's, I don't know.
Right.
It's...
Which, that brief description does sound like the writer of it had a vast knowledge of some of the things. Like, we're coming across all these books. They were put on the internet on sacredtext.com. It's easy to get to them. Would a peasant from Stratford upon Avon have had that breadth of storytelling to understand all the things we just talked about?
Yeah, that is a weird aspect about Shakespeare.
And it's just that thing of, you hear a lot of weird aspects of Shakespeare. I've never heard one of the weird aspects being that fairy poetry didn't exist before him. Like, that's a new one on me. And it's worth noting that dude, this is his big book on it. Chapter 1 was on fairies. Like, he was out the door. He's like, we need to get out of the door first. These fairies. You know what I mean?
When talking about Shakespeare, he's like, let's talk about the fairies first. Yeah.
Let's get this fairy going. All right, so the next book is the Folklore of the Isle of Man. I think we can do that in a few minutes. It has a couple very interesting things that tie to broader things, and it makes a nice natural break, because everything after that starts becoming people theorizing about what these stories are.
Okay.
So these are stories from the Isle of Man. So the Isle of Man in the British Isles there. So it is part of that, but it is a distinct culture, the Manx culture. The Manx are an ethnic group originating in the Isle of Man in the Irish Sea. So it is a distinct native culture within that, and this is their storytelling. So worth noting that, but it's still lumped into the broader British Isles. Okay. And this is The Fairy Folklore of the Isle of Man by A.W. Moore from 1891. The beliefs in fairies or elves was formerly very prevalent in the Isle of Man and cannot be said to have altogether died out even at the present day. The Manx conception of a fairy seems to be very much the same as that in Celtic lands, with perhaps a tinge of the somewhat more somber Scandinavian superstition. They are supposed to be like human beings in form and feature, though very much smaller and more delicately constructed. At a distance, they seem to be handsome, but on closer inspection, they're often found to be decrepit and withered. They're usually represented as being clad in blue or green with red-peaked caps. They live in green hillsides, more especially affecting the ancient tumuli.
Yeah.
That's interesting. They live in hillsides, more especially affecting the ancient tumuli. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Anyone straying near these on a fine summer's evening would probably hear delightful music, but he must take care, especially if he is a musician, not to linger lest he should be entrapped. Sometimes, too, they may be seen playing like children or dancing with rings seen on the grass being caused by this. At other times feasting, they hunt, being for the most part very furious riders. They are partly human and partly spiritual in their nature, and are visible to men only when they choose. Some of them are benevolent, curing men of diseases and delivering them from misfortune. Others are malevolent, stealing children, even abducting grown people and bringing misfortune. The flint arrowheads, which are occasionally picked up, are the weapons with which the fairies avenge themselves upon human beings who had wronged them.
Yeah.
Their impact is not felt and does not break the skin, but a blue mark is found on the body of the victim after death. The good fairies are fortunately more powerful than the bad and will enable those who are considerate in their behavior to them to prevail over the latter. It is therefore very desirable to keep on good terms with them and to propitiate them by taking care not to wound their feelings. With this view, they are called the little people, or the good people, the word
folk.
fairy never being mentioned, as they are supposed to not like it. Indeed, the Manx word fairish is merely a recent corruption of the English word, there being no such word in the Manx language 150 years ago. That's interesting. It is an old custom to keep a fire burning in the house during the night so that the fairies might come and enjoy it. If anyone was rash enough not to do this or to abuse them in any way, he would be sure to suffer of it. It was also customary to leave some bread out for the fairies and to fill water crocks with clean water for them before going to bed. The water was never used for any other purpose but was thrown out in the morning. The Manx women formerly would not spin on Saturday evenings, as this was deemed displeasing, and at every baking and churning a small bit of dough and butter was stuck in the wall for their consumption. All right, skipping a little bit. But there are methods for protecting human beings and animals against fairies, which are so well known that there is no need to apply to a charmer before applying them. Thus, salt is very efficacious, and so is iron, as will be seen from stories which follow. It was necessary to take great care of children, especially before baptism, as one of the commonest actions of the malevolent fairies is to steal children. If a child were taken away, a decrepit and emaciated fairy would be found in its place, and the prettier the child, the greater the risk of this.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
So hold on. So one second.
Yeah.
There's three things that have stacked up here. One, tumuli, just to be clear, these are ancient mounds, burial places, ruins, right? So the Fae are always associated with these ancient places. Then you have the idea that these flint weapons, these arrowheads that are all over the place, are actually Fae weaponry. Right, so what's happening there? But in both places, they're being associated with something that is ancient.
Yeah, ancient and lost.
Yeah. And then the last thing. Let's see. What was I going to say? There were three things. Damn it! I lost number three. B, yeah.
Was it stealing kids?
Yeah. B. The other thing was
baptism.
Hey,
that's it. You got it. Yeah, baptism. Like the idea that baptism actually will protect someone. Like, in other words, the child is in great danger of being abducted until they get baptized, right? And so one of the questions about, like, is it possible that ritual, because the baptism is a kind of a ritual, spread across this country so much like that because it actually was working. In some way, like this is strange.
Well, yeah, it was marking you.
Yeah,
you belong to the one.
Yeah, you
God.
belong to a really big fairy in the sky.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, don't go messing with the ones who've got that mark.
Right.
The other thing the only other thing I would point out is that whoever this is doing the commentary is saying basically if you go out in a midsummer night, you're likely to see the fairy. The Fae folk or something like that, or encounter them. So Shakespeare's play is A Midsummer Night's Dream. The dream was the encounter with the Fae folk, essentially.
Absolutely. It's also worth noting the baptism thing. You could read that. I could personally read that as being like, well, yeah, because Christianity's right and Jesus is the blah blah blah, right? That's a pretty reasonable within the worldview that makes sense.
That this is a claim they're making. Yeah.
Right. And there's also then the element of the spinning a potato, which is like, well, you got a whole town together and we all did this to protect you, so it works.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it could be potato spinning.
Works.
Yeah.
All right, just to read a couple more paragraphs here. We've already touched on the biggest points from this, which we're bringing up with it. This one includes the flint arrows and the stealing of children and the missing people, and that's just some stuff I wanted to mention too. But I'll just read on a little further. On Midsummer Eve, when their power was at its height, flowers and herbs are the only barriers to their incursions, and these are regularly spread at the doors of the houses to protect the inmates. They are also supposed to be always abroad during the harvest moon, and many stories are related of their excursions through the island, and particularly of their merrymakings in Glentremont. The interior of Fairy Hill in Rushen is supposed to be the palace of the Fairy King, and many a tale was told of the midnight revels of the fairy court of Mona. Waldron, to whom we owe most of our stories about fairies, after referring to their ignorance of the Manx people as being the cause of their excessive superstition, writes, I know not idolizers as they are of the clergy, whether they would even be refractory to them, were they to preach against the existence of fairies, or even against their being commonly seen. They confidently assert that the first inhabitants of their island were fairies, and so do they maintain that these little people still have their residence among them. They call them the good people and say they live in wilds and forests and on mountains, and shun great cities because of the wickedness acted therein. All the houses are blessed where they visit, and they fly vice. A person would be thought impudent profane who should suffer his family to go to bed without first setting a tub with a pail full of clean water for the guests to bathe themselves in, which the natives ever constantly do as soon as ever the eyes of the family are closed, wherever they vouchsafe to come. Man, this is weird. If anything happens to be mislaid and found again in some place where it was not expected, they presently tell you a fairy took it and returned it. If you chance to get a fall and hurt yourself, a fairy laid something in your way to throw you down as a punishment for some sin you have committed. Okay.
Yep, I worked for a guy who he swore that something would take all the Phillips screwdrivers out of the shop and replace them with flatheads.
Fantastic.
And then when he needed a flathead, they swapped them.
Yeah. All you could find.
All you could find were Phillips. He was just like, they change. Like, his theory was that they change when you're not looking. Like, they just switch from flathead to Phillips.
I like that.
Based on
Oh man, that phenomenon is real.
yeah,
That is a real one.
a joke can too, man.
Yeah. I mean,
The best
like,
part is
they
when he's not
changed.
looking, it's actually both.
Yeah, I'd go complain to him like, I can't find a Phillips screwdriver. They change. I know.
I've definitely had that happen many times where I'm like, I'm going to my toolbox because I need a Phillips. I'm like, that's all I have, because every time I've looked for a
Right.
flathead, there's none in there, and then I look and all I can find are flatheads in there. I'm just like, what is going on?
That's definitely the fair.
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah, it is. All right, I'll just tack on this last paragraph here. Further on in his book, after giving a number of Gaelic fairy tales, he continues, the Manx fairy creed is again the same. Similar beings are supposed to exist and are known by the name of fairish, which a common Manxman assured me was a genuine Manx word. If so, fairy may be Old Celtic and derived from the same root as fen instead of being derived from it. The fairies in the Isle of Man are believed to be spirits. They are not supposed to throw arrows, as they are said to still do in the Highlands. None of the old peasants seem to take the least interest in elf shots, the flint arrows, which generally lead to a story when shown elsewhere. One old man said, the fairish have no body, no bones, and scorn the arrowheads. It is stated in Train's history that there are no flint arrowheads in the Isle of Man, but as there are numerous barrens, flint weapons may yet be discovered when someone looks for them. Still, these Manx fairies, much the same as their neighbors on the mainland, they go into mills at night and grind stolen corn, they steal milk from the cattle, they live in green mounds. In short, they are like little mortals invested with supernatural power.
the whole like mysterious grinding of like work being done at night when no one's looking is just really
Right.
weird, right?
Yes.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
some of the traditions, like the whole like, okay, fill this trough up with water or whatever, this bowl before you go to bed for the fae folk, and then when you come out in the morning, you dump it out. You don't use it for anything else, right? So that is strange, but you know, you can see that as being some kind of superstitious thing you might do, like throwing salt away. But
Right.
who has like done a bunch of work in the middle of the night to try to convince people that fairies are real? You know, how does this story come about? Where it's like you go up into the mill in the morning, you're like, wow, look at all these bags of grain that we definitely didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, must be the fae.
Often it's the work of 20 men. You know, it's not just my
Yeah,
day's labor.
right.
It's more than I could have done in a day.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a strange part of it. Like this idea that there was free work being done,
Mhm.
houses being cleaned,
Right.
grain being, ground, wheat being threshed, like all that stuff, and
Yep.
horses being groomed. It's just strange that it seems like if you're trying to explain bad things, like when people are saying like, yeah, when you trip over something, it's because the fairy threw something in front of you. Like that's an understandable sort of superstition.
Right.
But lots of work being done in the middle of the night that no one will take credit for is weird.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, that
it's
makes
all
me think
very
of the
weird.
whole, sort of Santa Claus or Saint Nick.
Oh yeah, and he's definitely Fae, right?
Yeah, but it's again, it's like this good deed. Like all these presents show up.
Yeah.
No one claims credit for it.
More presents than my parents could have bought in a night.
You got to leave out cookies.
Yeah,
and milk
cookies and milk for him. I mean, like there's plenty of Fae stuff with Santa Claus.
And then it's also tied to the equinox, or sorry, that'd be the winter
solstice.
the
Yeah,
winter solstice.
Mm-hmm.
So
he's part.
You get into.
He's part of the winter court, right?
Mm-hmm.
Santa,
he's a midwinter night.
Right.
Yeah, he's definitely part of the winter court, not the summer court of the Fae. Yeah.
Yeah. Still a comedy, just less on the nose, you know.
But it's interesting because the winter fairies, like in some cases, the idea is that they all change because they change aspects with the seasons. So they're not necessarily different entities, but that during the winter they're darker, they're less. The encounters are less likely to be good for people, and then in the summer they're more tricky. They're whimsical,
Yeah. Well, what if that is some aspect of this whole thing where what they're describing as Fae is actually maybe an anthropomorphizing process or a personification process of the natural changes of the natural world? You get into winter time and it's a little bit more of this and that, and the risk of fire goes up and this and that. So the change, the Fae corresponds to it. And then maybe the idea would be the amount of work done in a day on Midsummer Eve is more than you could ever do, is because, well, the days are longer and you're knocking out work. You know what I mean? Like when you show up to work in midsummer and the weather's good, I mean, you're knocking it out, bro, you know? So maybe it's just that kind of thing where the aspects of day-to-day life in this cyclical nature, in this seasonal climate-driven world we live in, that gets a personification. It gets a name. You know?
Yeah, like it's a kind of like an animism of phenomena and forces that are just relative to nature.
Yeah, you could do that with the with the food and the drink and stuff. It's like if you partake of that, it's almost like a glutton, or you'll get trapped in taking these like amazing foods and drinks or something like that. You know what I mean? And then you lose 20 years. Then you wake up 20 years later and your life is gone, and you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like,
there's some of that caught in the story of Persephone too. Like she goes into the underworld, and then she has the pomegranate, right? Like she eats this one fruit from the underworld, and then she can't leave. Yeah. But then there's this deal made that she can come back for spring, right? So then again, you have the winter and summer deal. Yeah. But it's like and this was kind of in the fairy faith in Celtic countries, was how closely, or how it sort of merges with the other world, that people don't just have encounters with fae, but they're having a kind of a fairy encounter, but then they see dead relatives. Right? And this is where it also merges with the UFO phenomena, where somebody has what looks like an alien encounter, but then they're talking to their grandfather or whatever, right? It's very similar in the fae stuff. Like somebody has a fairy encounter, they go into the underworld, or they're taken into the world of the fairies, and then they're speaking to a relative who's been dead for a long time.
Right.
So there's this, and then the fact that they're associated with ancient burial mounds, right? Yep. So it's weird that they sort of live in this in-between realm. Like they're not the afterlife, but they're somehow closer to it than we are.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, I don't know what to make of any of that. Just like Andrew was saying, it's like, I don't know what any of this means, but it is weird. Yeah, I mean, I guess if you wanted to just go pure, like if you just wanted to go like whatever academics would say is like it's just a merging of like misunderstandings of the natural world with people's thoughts about the afterlife and superstition, right? And you just mash all that together, give people 10 centuries to come up with weird stories, and there you have it, right? And it also is tied into even more ancient culture, although I don't think any, peasants from the 1600s were reading Pliny. So how were they sourcing it from the Greek people? But there is some kind of connection there.
Yep. All of the stuff that follows in this report, it starts with a guy named David McRitchie. McRitchie proposed a thesis that we'll get into later, which is effectively what you're saying, which is this is all very explainable. It's all very explainable.
Yeah, we can totally explain
There were people
this.
that used to live here. They weren't so tall, you see. And the stories of these people, they're gone now. So the stories have shrunk like a fish you caught. And anyway, you kind of get into this. It's all very explainable, but as there were other people in the late 19th century and early 20th century also going, it doesn't actually explain what people are reporting in their firsthand accounts.
Yeah.
Which were still ongoing. We'll get into a bit more of that next time for sure.
Cool.
But it is. They definitely start getting into ideas of what could be going on, and it definitely feels like one of those things. I'll just go ahead and slide a quick soccer reference in here to make everybody happy. And take Rafa Benitez's blanket. Just bear with me, people. It's like a blanket that's too small. Anytime on your bed, anytime you go to pull it up to cover your upper body, it exposes your feet. Any theory you can have for what's going on here, the minute you pull that theory over to cover one thing, it exposes something else.
Yeah.
It's like, but that doesn't do anything to help us with this thing. And you go, but what if this was going on? But then what about this other thing? It's like, there's no way to get all of the constituent parts, all of the similarities, all of the consistencies that don't add up. I don't see a way to get those to jive together.
Yeah.
I can come up with explanations for singular aspects of them that can explain it away, let's say, or even woo it away if you want. But still, even the wooing it away creates questions of what the hell does this mean?
Yeah. Wait, where was the soccer reference?
I didn't get the soccer.
I didn't
part
see.
of that.
Where
Are there blankets in soccer?
No, but Rafa Benitez, former coach of Liverpool Football Club, gave a very famous speech about defense and how you cover it, and it's like a blanket that's too small. The people who are paying attention get it. It's Rafa Benitez for Liverpool Football Club. I was going to explain it more, but you two absolutely protested there like I'd mentioned something rotten. I'm just talking about the most popular team sport in the world.
That was
anyway, Rafa
a
Benitez
4D sports
speech.
reference right there. I just didn't get that one.
Yeah.
Would you say that this is your favorite topic?
Would I indeed?
Hey.
Or is it? Do you think this is real phenomena or is it fake news?
Yeah. Fake news. Man, I wish I could. I don't even have any good ones to come back with. The rest of them are hard to pun with. Niece, kobold, hobgoblin. It's hard to pun with hobgoblin.
Yeah.
Maybe he's just talking shit.
All right.
He is very quick. This one.
We got to stop. Let's do space for the news. From spaceweather.com, ladies and gentlemen, here at the end of the show. Rare blue supermoon tonight. When the sun goes down tonight, step outside and look east. That bright silvery orb rising into the twilight is a rare blue supermoon. It is 15% brighter than average full moons and capable of raising unusually high perigean spring tides. Also, the space station transited the sun recently, and they're just pointing out that there's a bunch of sunspots, but one of them is not like the other ones because it was the actual space station, and it was the China space station, the Tiangong space station. It is currently crewed by 3 Chinese astronauts, and China hopes to keep at least that many astronauts on board for at least 10 years. And next year, Tiangong will be joined by a Hubble-class space telescope, which will share the space station's orbit and be able to dock with it for repairs and upgrades. This means that solar transits of this space station in 2024 might actually be double transits, 1 space station and 1 telescope. Current conditions, solar wind speed is 313.1 kilometers per second. The density is 3.12 protons per cubic centimeter. Sunspot number is 94. not 95 because that was a space station. And the neutron count today is -3%, which so that is 3% below the space age average. And the KP index is 1, which is quiet. 24-hour max was 2.33, which is on the upper end of the quiet range. And that is your space weather news for the week.
Did
Gone
you
through
know?
real quickly there?
Did you know, like when you that we all postponed the show, and it's like a fairy blue moon tonight or something? Is that what's going on?
No. Yeah, we actually were going to do the show last night, but then we postponed it, and now we're doing it tonight on some kind of crazy fey blue moon.
I looked it up, and the full moon is actually supposed to be tomorrow. But man, when it was coming up, I was walking out there. I was just like, "Wow, this is pretty awesome." I was getting worried.
Oh yeah,
Something might happen.
it's too close.
It's too close.
It's way too close right now.
GMA is calling me,
Uh-oh.
but I'll have to hang up on him. Sorry,
Yeah,
GMA.
you're gonna have to talk to him later.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Drew, I really appreciate you coming on. And folks, if you caught it, we're going to be having him back on because there's a whole bunch of material to go through here. So we will be getting Drew back on until we're done with this material. So next week, hopefully he'll be back. And maybe the week after that, we'll see.
Yeah, and
this is really great. I love this kind of stuff, so I really appreciate you bringing this
it's
stuff.
kind of hard for me to, it's one of those things, like I just kind of started putting it together selfishly, and it is one of those, like, I think it's interesting because I've read through it all, but I do hope it comes across as interesting, not just the same story over and over. Because
no, I love this kind of stuff. Yeah.
All right, good.
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm just trying. I can't help but I don't know. I think of symbolism, and I'm try to imagine some type of, like you were saying before, like a moral or some kind of thing that's going to be a purpose for this story that would be some normal reason why people might keep telling it. And like Russ was saying, like maybe they add parts to it. It could have much older sources, but they add stuff. But I don't know. For me, I like to think of the symbolism and all that kind of stuff that are involved. But they are strange, and the connections across.
Well, and that's the cool thing about it, is that there are many possibilities on where these stories came from. But one of them, which is like the Snake Bros, reason, is that they're talking about something real. And that's why they're weird. Right. They're weird because they're reflective of the phenomena that they're discussing. And it's worth it certainly dovetails with other topics, So it's just, I don't know, it's paranormal in its aspect.
Right. And it's worth noting, I think it was in the Manx one, the one we were just reading, Folklore of the Isle of Man, when he talked about, I know not idolizers as there of clergy, whether they would even be refractory to them, were they to preach against the existence of fairies, or even against their being commonly seen. They confidently assert the person have. So preachers and clergy are unwilling to preach that they exist, or even that they are commonly seen.
Yeah.
It is worth noting, my point in that is that these aren't just stories that were handed down just because they are interesting and quirky. People took them seriously.
Yeah.
Like, people took them very seriously. Old, revered people in the community were holding on to these stories because they were important. That's its own fact in this. You know what I mean? It's that they were revered. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know.
And that, again, I know I keep referencing this book, but in Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, he stresses that he basically went on a walkabout. He traveled to all these little tiny villages, and every place, when they stopped, he basically was taken to the residences of the oldest, most respected people in the town, and then he got their stories about the Fae folks. From these aren't like crazy people that live in a barn or whatever. The oldest, most respected people, the most upstanding citizens in these little towns were the ones with the stories that he wrote down.
Exactly.
So it's just, I don't know. It is fascinating. I love the whole thing. So.
Yeah, it's great, man.
Yeah.
Well, good.
I am enjoying it, and I want to keep doing this.
Yeah.
However, I'm trying to mention the executive producers of the show, and they're all writing notes, and PayPal is not letting me see the whole note.
Oh.
It's supposed to be only like 200 characters or something.
Oh, okay. So you're pulling it up on the...
Well, I was going to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, let me
He's
see
pulling
if
it
I
up,
can
folks.
Let
We'll
me
see if we can
it.
get the executive producer notes here
I don't even know
for the
what
end
this
of the show.
password is. Let's
Uh-oh.
see. Oh man.
Oh, no. Can you do the code?
Yeah, let me do that.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Give me that code. Give me that code. Yeah, it's every one of them just ends in ... Let's see.
Maybe they all just left cliffhanger notes.
Yeah, I know.
Right? I mean,
Let's
we
see.
can't disregard that, buddy.
Let's see if I can see it. See this one. Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
Let's see if it shows me the whole note.
Yeah, there you go.
Where's the whole note? Do you see the note? Aha!
Yeah.
Okay. Andrea Johnson, which we've met on the Scablands trip.
Yeah. Executive producer.
Executive producer, $111.11.
Hey. Where's my bell?
She says, the Gods of Eden series is blowing my mind and heart, connecting me back to spirituality and the human experience, giving me a sense of wholeness during a tough time. Meh, personal problems are petty when you zoom out. Haha, thank you.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank
I
you
totally
so much.
Get that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I agree. Sometimes you just got to go outside at night and look up at space and contemplate space. And then you realize that you're this tiny thing on a tiny thing in this enormous thing. And then, a lot of the little personal problems you're having they seem like maybe they're manageable at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we have another executive producer. And what is the total here?
11114.
Yeah. 111 and 14.
What?
Whoa, this is weird. From Jess Redmon, executive producer of the show, says, keep on snaking, bros. Just got into your recent episodes from the beginning. Hit Cosmographia 95 and had to jump to your pod to fill the time. Love it as much as Cosmo now. Manticore. I guess that's in the Discord.
I don't know.
Signed Manticore.
Signed Manticore. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And I think that's all is... I have other notes. Should I do that, or should we do that on another?
Yeah, you got a couple more notes?
Couple more
Gotta
notes.
read the notes. You told people to write the notes.
I did. I did. It's just weird that it won't give them to me now on my phone. I guess it's like the app updated and it doesn't give me the whole note. Here we go. And then on the computer, it doesn't show you the note.
Right.
You gotta click on it.
Yeah.
All right. This is from Dylan Jones. Says, thank you from Brisbane, Australia.
Hey.
Please get Randall to do a climate science documentary while the legend still lives. The world needs it. From Dizza. No.
Right.
Thank you so much for the donation.
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
It's $10. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, when the request is please get Randall to do something, the answer is almost always no. Like we can't get him to do anything. So
yeah, he decides what he's gonna do. That's it. All right, next. And this is I think the last one from Charles Meredith. And it is a $12.35 donation. Thank you very much. He says, love the show. Except it's supposed to be Sow. I found you on Cosmographia, and after listening to those, I started at the beginning of your show. Currently on episode 121. Mind equals blown. Where is this button?
where's this? Yeah, there it is.
Any chance I can get one of those emails? Hoping to get Johnson B. Flap at Snake Bros. stuck.
That's the old Snake Bros email.
Promising people emails back in the day. Just sign up and I'll give you an email. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That was years ago.
Yeah, that was. Yep, we don't go back and change old mistakes
Right.
on the show. So if you hear me promising to give people emails,
Yeah.
that ain't happening anymore. All right.
Yeah,
folks.
I still get occasional questions about stuff that happened in really old shows, and I'm just like, nope. Like, what happened to Mind the Hive?
Yeah, that was a genius idea that didn't pan out.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Can we get an email address? Yeah, no. Yeah. All right, folks. Hope you
LP,
guys enjoyed this. Yeah, thanks LP.
so much. That's great.
Really appreciate
we'll
it.
do again
Absolutely.
soon.
Thank y'all for having me. Let's do it. It's great.
Yeah, we'll do it again next week.
All right, are you ready for this part?
You ready?
Oh,
You
I'm
got
ready.
your line?
Probably. Depends on where you point at me.
Oh, he's got it. All right. Well, we love you guys.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work!
All right.
Marty's going to be mad because we gave you too much prep for that. He's gonna be like,
Yeah, right.